try it again. What's up, everyone? Hope everyone's having a great day. Sorry about the technical issues. Still sounds like I'm having issues. Here's computer. Work. Well, not with my home setup. This computer could be a real pain. Really can. So, hope everyone's having fun. I think we're back. I think so. I guess you guys would know more than me. It looks like we're back on my end. So, what happened? I forgot what it was. Sometimes I forgot why I got a new camera in the first place with my work or with my home studio. This Logitech that I have, it's got a short in the wire, so you have to have it positioned just right, or it starts freaking out like it's Get ready for the Night Patrol, Nerdy Cup. All is well. Hope you're safe out there tonight. I really do. Yeah, everything's going great. I'm having a great time. Life is good. I got a lot of good stuff coming up here that I'm very excited about. So, it should be a lot of fun. We'll discuss I have been confirmed. I will be on Tim Pool's Culture War podcast this Friday, the 15th. I believe the guest with me will be Benjamin Weirgarden from Epic Times. He's sort of a journalist that's I think, anti-Biden, we'll say. He's definitely more akin to my side than otherwise. But I don't know him very well. So actually, strangely enough, I did find out today. Happened to be working and had YouTube on as I was driving around. And I saw Andrew Wilson's also got an invite to the Crucible. And it was originally maybe going to be the 15th as well. But I think they're going to put that off some other day. So, yeah, I was going to mention Andrew to Tim as a potential guest. I really was, but now I guess it's sort of irrelevant. Yeah, I'm going to be on Whick's show this Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. The topic, a little strange. My answer will probably be a little more nuanced than they're expecting, but it is Trump good for the Republican Party? It's kind of a strange question. Depends on how you define good and how you define Republican Party. But we'll get into it in that debate, so I think that'll be fun. You know, the panels I really don't like, but here's the deal. Not many people want to debate me one-on-one anymore, so my best chance for interaction with people at this point is to do the panels. So that's what I'll do. Tim Pool's show is going to be this Friday, so that is the 15th, and it'll be, I think, 10 a.m. I would give Biden's State of the Union a 4 to a 4.5, is what I would give it. Yeah, the topic for Wick's show, it's like, also, I don't know. If it was me and I was doing a show, if I was doing the arena, and the topic was, is Trump good for the Republican Party? If it was you, who would you have on as guest? Who are you interested in hearing from as to whether or not Trump is good for Republicans? Anyone have I know who I would have. I don't mean specific person. I mean types of people. I would want... Good evening. Is Trump good for Republican Party? Whose opinions would I want? People that are... Neighbor guy. No. I would want Republicans. Right? That's probably who I would want. Well, I mean, Charlie Kirk would... Yeah, I didn't mean specific person. I meant like the type of person. That's who I would be most interested in. Like, if they had a topic, is Biden good for Democrats? I mean, I have opinions. I'll come on a show and discuss it. But if I was the Democrats, I'd tell me to pound sand. I'd be like, who cares what you think? Because I have a vested interest in saying the opposite of the truth. If I think Biden's good for the Democrats, well, then I might say, actually, I think he's bad, to try to convince people to get rid of him. Or if I think he's bad, I might say, Biden's great, keep him. Yeah, he's awesome. And I feel like what we'll see is a bunch of lefties that'll be like, oh man, Trump's the worst, blah, blah, blah. You know who'd be good for the Republicans? Nikki Haley. You guys should just nominate a Democrat. Liz Cheney, Adam Kissinger. That would be great candidates for the Republican. Great. I'm like 30 seconds ahead of Twitch chat. Maybe if you were fresh, I don't know. I'd never vote for a woman. Depends on what you're voting for. I could see myself voting for a woman president. I'm not a Margaret Thatcher type. You wouldn't go for that? So, yeah, it should be a good show. I'm looking forward to doing it. Right, that's kind of what I'm thinking, Crucible. That's exactly sort of what my take would be. If you call the Republican Party that existed pre-Trump, so that would be like the Republican Party that was epitomized by John McCain and Paul Ryan, then Trump is very bad for that, which is good, because that party sucked and didn't represent me in any way, shape, or form. That party is the Uniparty, right? If it's just people with R's next to their name getting victories, is Trump good or bad? A little bit of both. But that's because largely the Republican leadership is intentionally sabotaging people they see as MAGA people or potential outsiders, because they would rather be the minority party that they're in total control over than the majority party that they lose their control over. And so, in that sense, by Trump being a potential outsider, it's caused Republican leadership and the Republican donor class to cut off their nose to spite their face in many instances. So you could say, purely in that calculation, that Trump is bad for the Republican Party. So there are other things that are bad with Trump. Like, Trump does bring on people that, not all, but there are people that will follow anything Trump says, and that's not good for the health of a party. For me, look, this is easy. If you're religious, I shouldn't have to tell you. If you're a Christian, I shouldn't have to tell you. You should never put total faith in any one human being, not even yourself. But even if you're not religious, like, you understand the folly. Everyone will let you down. I'll let you down. You'll let yourself down. So to put total faith in any one person is a mistake. And I do unfortunately see that Trump's gregarious personality, which is a huge help to him getting him elected the first time, and it goes along with his character, which I have nothing negative to say as far as the accomplishments of winning in 2016. But those things that are a benefit of him also do make some people like him to the point where they won't criticize him about anything, and they'll listen to anything he says. And I think that's a mistake. And I think that that could lead to harming the Republican Party overall, in the sense that I want the Republican Party to be, which is an oppositional conservative, fiscally conservative party. Yeah, that's exactly right, Crucible. Republicans have no choice but to yield to populism now. And again, let me be clear, right? Like, Trump is a very talented man. He is. And I have plenty of things to criticize Trump for. I do it all the time. But he's very talented. And if you don't think so, who else had the potential as a potential outsider who literally was questioning and attacking the intel agencies and the mainstream media? Who else could have taken those slings and arrows and won the 2016 election? Who? Well, who were the Republicans offering? Jeb Bush? Marco Rubio? Please. So Trump accomplished something, and some of it has to do with luck. Like, well, I don't know if luck's the right word. Because of circumstances he was born into, he was able to accumulate a bunch of wealth. A lot of that had to do with his own personal ability, but let's not kid ourselves. A lot of it had to do because he was born in a family that also was wealthy. And that wealth is something that's basically a precursor to winning on the national stage at this point while being a potential outsider. Because if you don't have wealth like that, then you have to get your message out in some way. And if you don't have the wealth to kind of get your message out there independently and you have to rely on traditional mechanisms, it would be more difficult. Because of Trump, I think there's a possibility that people now that aren't as wealthy and that aren't connected actually have a chance to use sort of similar strategies of Trump, which are talk directly to the people, use things like social media, build up a grassroots primarily through an online presence. So I think that's one of the things that Trump helped break the glass on, which is another good thing with Trump. But I can't think of anyone else that could have done what he did in 2016. I think by every metric that I'm concerned with, Ron Paul is a superior politician to Donald Trump. He had better ideas. I think he was, what's the word I'm looking for? He seemed more polished as a politician. Yet he couldn't remotely overcome the corruption. He didn't have the independent charisma or wealth to do so. Trump did. And no one could ever take that away from him. But that's led to people sort of saying it's Trump or bust forever. And I think that while I agree with MAGA and populism, I think that there are other directions you could go. And there's certainly criticism that you could levy at Trump to try to steer him in the right track. But, Crucible says it's because of liberal policies of the Republican Party, it's populism or bust. Yeah, that's absolutely true. What was it about Trump that was so appealing? Now, I talked about this the other night, so I won't harp on it too much, right? Actual conservatives, like middle-class, blue-collar conservatives, who represented them going into 2016? Who represented them for years? Who was it? If you're a conservative, if you're a social conservative, name me one prominent politician that advocated for socially conservative positions. And if they did, what were their victories? Who were the fiscal conservatives? What were their victories? We couldn't even, not only were there no political victories, there weren't even cultural victories. We couldn't have people in positions of political positions even paying lip service. For example, being a rural white person was just written off as it's shameful. You're the problem. At best, the politicians that you voted for would ignore you. Those you didn't vote for would attack you. That's what Trump popularity came from. He talked about issues that people, average Americans, blue-collar Americans, were concerned with, like the border, which people in the Republican Party said, that's a loser, don't talk about that. Well, it was an absolute winner. It's a massively popular issue because people see, despite what all the think tanks tell you, despite what all the universities tell you, despite what all the media tells you, illegal immigration fucking sucks. It sucks. – 2012 was Ron Paul, right? Those 2 years. Maybe he ran in 2000. I would have been 16, so I wasn't really voting or paying attention much back then. But the bar was so low. Any politician that had any sort of talent and charisma and a chance to win at the national level that even spoke kindly of blue-collar people, of Christians, of rural Americans. People are going to crawl over broken glass for them because no one gives a shit about those groups. But that doesn't mean that you have to have undying fealty to the first guy that spoke favorably about you and your group. You can still criticize and say what you disagree. For example, what's the name of the dude Rand Paul just put out? Trump endorsed, let me see. Let me save this. Rogers was the dude's name. Super swampy military-industrial complex dude that Trump just came out and endorsed. Stupid. But people will go along with it because Trump can do no wrong. Mike Rogers from Michigan. So, but anyways, that's what we'll be talking about Wednesday. And Tim Pool's show, so it looks like Benjamin Weirgarten, I believe is his name, from Epoch Times, is going to be the guest that will be on with me. Now, I would have preferred to debate someone. That's what I would have wanted. That's, I think, what people like seeing me do most. That's what I feel most comfortable doing. So I would have loved to go in real life on Tim Pool's show and have a debate with someone, particularly someone who's a bigger streamer or a bigger presence. Names that I throw out as suggestions: Destiny was a name that I would have debated again. The Krasenstein brothers, Chank, David Pakman, Sam Cedar. I would have Philip Mudd from the Washington Post. I would have loved to have debated. Yeah, I think Mike. I don't know Benjamin well, but if we are going to have a disagreement, it might be. I don't know, but I think Mr. Weirgarten might be a big fan of sending aid to Israel, of which I am not. So that could potentially be an area of disagreement. I would prefer not to spend much time talking about that issue, because I don't really care. I think to me it's a red herring. We spend so much time focused on these conflicts in other places that are tragic. I feel bad for every innocent person that dies in that conflict or any other. But it's used as an excuse to siphon out wealth from the poor and working class in this country, just like Ukraine is. Yeah, I'm certainly not disappointed either. Don't get me wrong. Don't take it. I'm not upset that things didn't work out as far as finding someone for me to debate against. But that's perfectly fine. And I told them, I was like, hey, I'm more than capable of going by myself. I can talk we can do a 4-hour show. I don't give a shit. I can talk for 4 hours. No problem. So I would have been happy to go on by myself if that's what it took. But I'll also be happy to have a guest. Hopefully we can have a good back and forth between all of us. I think it'll be great. So I'll get more details to you as the week goes on. The plan is I will be leaving Thursday. So it's an in real life event. It'll take me about 4 hours to drive there. So I will be leaving Thursday. And then I got a hotel Thursday night, which they provided for me. And so I'll be staying Thursday night, then get up, get some breakfast, go to the show. So I probably will try to stream on my phone, probably to YouTube specifically, because unfortunately I haven't figured out how to multi-stream on my phone. So Thursday night I'll probably from my hotel do a phone stream, and we'll do a stream then. So that should be good. Also, one thing I wanted to bring up real quick, and then we'll jump into whatever people want to talk about here today. I'm starting to think, I don't know if you could hear, IRL, that's what they're calling it. Well, see, but here's the problem. Timcast IRL is the name of his evening show, which I'm doing the Culture War podcast. So if I say IRL, it could confuse people to thinking I'm doing the night show. Don't worry, Joshua. One thing about me is... that's fine. I don't mind being a bit of a dick when they start it. That's fine. I think it would make me look good on the show. But yeah, I won't be pushed around. It's all right. I know what I'm doing, and so yeah, it'll be fun. I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm not that nervous. Aftershock asked me if I was nervous. I'm not really nervous because it's just talking about stuff that I'm talking about. I always get nervous when it's competition. Thank you so much for the congrats, everyone. I really appreciate it. So, like, in debate, even if it was a round I knew I was going to win when I was in college, I would get a little nervous, just because I was really wanting to win. And then the only other thing I could think of that I used to get nervous all the time was when I was in band in high school. I don't know why, but I always got very nervous. Like, I was always afraid, because by the time I was a senior, I had, like, solos. I played French horn, and I was always convinced that I was going to screw up. And I usually did okay. I would say I was an average French horn player for high school, so... no topic specifically. I told them what I would like to talk about is double standards and corruption in our government. But I don't know if that's going to be the topic or not, seeing as how they got another guest as well. I'll bet that's where I take it, though. So, my understanding is normally what they do is talk about, you kind of each introduce yourselves and talk about issues that are important to you, and then he'll read some news stories of the day. And I mean, what's going to be in the news? Stories of double standards, corruption, etc. So, you know, it should be fun. Yeah, driving from PA, it'll be about a 4-hour drive. It's about 2 hours and 20 minutes. It depends on traffic. It'd be around 2 hours to get to the airport in Pittsburgh, which is the the nearest airport. So by the time I drove to the airport, then flew to West Virginia, then get a rental car from the airport in West Virginia to the hotel, I'd probably be looking at 4 hours minimum. So it will literally probably be quicker to just drive my own car, which is what I will do. And more comfortable to just drive my own car. So that's the plan. Anyways, one thing I wanted to bring up right before we jump in here is, I don't know if you could hear, my computer here is constantly overheating. I think the big issue is that my GPU is working overdrive when I'm using OBS. Partly, I think, because of Restream. Because I'm currently streaming to 5 platforms. Given that, I'm starting to think now when I do my shows remotely, when I'm not at my home studio, I think that what I'm going to do is only stream to one platform. Thanks, Sparky. I appreciate it, man. The question is, which platform? So there's several options. I could either pick YouTube or Twitch, or I could do like Mondays YouTube, Tuesdays Twitch, or I could just pick X and just do it all to X. I don't know. I'll ask the audience as time goes on here, and we'll try to, thanks, Crusader. We'll try to figure it out, what platform would be easiest for you all. Yeah, I've thought about dumping Twitch altogether, but I feel I owe my audience there. It's my oldest audience, and I have a lot of people that subscribe there. YouTube usually slightly outperforms Twitch. Yeah, but Sparky, you could say the same about any... I mean, Google literally steals elections for the party that encourages baby murder, child pornography, etc., etc. So, Twitch fans are the OGs. That's definitely true. Now, I started on YouTube, but no one watched me on YouTube. It's one of the things that's so... Like, I remember when we were going through payment processors. It was like, oh, you can support me on YouTube. And people are like, screw YouTube. I'm not going to send money through them. I was like, okay, you subscribe on Twitch. People are like, screw Twitch. It's owned by Amazon. They suck. It's like, okay, I got PayPal. And then people are like, yeah, but PayPal's done a bunch of terrible shit. What about Patreon? Patreon kicks people off for having conservative... It's like, ugh. There you go, neighbor guy. Switch to YouTube, right. Maybe we'll start off on YouTube. Maybe we'll try that for a week. The other thing that's nice about YouTube is, believe it or not, I could probably say more on YouTube. Like, if I ever want to show clips of a debate that I've been on, I have to be careful because Twitch has banned so many people that if I'm on a panel and say Destiny's on that panel and I show that on Twitch and the wrong person sees that, then I'll lose my channel. Now, YouTube, I'm sure it'll be, getting into election season here, I'm sure it'll be a bannable offense to say anything that the FBR Democrats don't like about the election. I'm sure YouTube will enforce that. So that could be fun going into it. But I don't know. Maybe I'll bounce back and forth. I'll do one show on YouTube and then one show on X and one show on Twitch. So, something like that. Rumble's fine. The problem with Rumble is I don't get any engagement on Rumble, and I can't use my Restream chat on Rumble. Even on Kick I can. So anyone watching on Kick, if they type right now, I can see. With Rumble, I can't. So if I switched over to Rumble, I know what would happen. It would only be 3 or 4 people watching live. Yeah, I can't. Well, there you go, Sparky. You got anything nice to say about anyone, Sparky? What we need is for Aircraft Sparky to start a video hosting service. That's what we need. Then we'll have a good place to go. But all right, what do y'all want to talk about today then? Let's see what's in the news. Let's see what I've bookmarked lately. That's always fun. So one of the things we could talk about Temple's going to be Friday. Drop the detail. Oh, okay. See, you people come in late, and then I got to repeat. I'll repeat myself for every person that comes in. Terrible. Temple show Friday, I believe 10 a.m. I'll know the time more specifically, but it's this Friday the 15th. It'll be his Culture War podcast. Obviously, it will not be streamed on my channel because I'll be there in person, so you'll have to watch his show. The other guest, tentatively at this time, is Brandy Weirgarten, which I can show you his page if you like. Oops. I'm sorry, did I say Brandy? It's not Brandy. I'm thinking of Randy Weirgarten, who is the teacher's. It's Benjamin. I just combined the two names. Benjamin Weingarten, I guess. You can check him out. There he is. So he's from Real Clear Politics, it looks like, and the Epic Times, both of which are good. A lot of stuff about Israel, Hamas. Talks a lot about the border. Yeah, we can talk about Haiti. Yeah. So, is Haiti better off now than before the Clinton Foundation went in there? How's that working out? Cannibals now? Open street cannibals in Haiti? Notice the places they go in are NGOs, the Clinton Foundation, sort of U.S. groups. Notice the places, government groups. Notice where they go in, right? It ends up like this, like Libya. How's Libya? Open air slave markets in Libya now. Right? Great. Doesn't mean Gaddafi is a good guy. Doesn't mean the people running Haiti were good guys. I don't know much about them. Right? Did you ever notice that? And then the places that they hate, like El Salvador with Bukele. Notice they hate that place. Why? Well, they cleaned up their streets. They went from the murder capital of the Western world to now the safest country. They don't like that. That's no good. Notice the Clinton Foundation didn't go in there. Did you notice that? Obama wasn't there. No, the Democrats were mad. In fact, I saw Rashida Tlaib said with the recent El Salvador elections, well, you got to keep her up. Make sure these are free and fair elections. Will they be saying the same in Haiti? Is that on? Government goes in. I mean, Libya is the best example to me. Now, Libya, there are a lot of problems with. Home ownership was a human right in Libya. They had the highest literacy rate of all sub-Saharan Africa. Now it's, and excuse my language, but I use this term for a reason, a shithole is what Libya is now. Because the UN and NATO and the United States, we went in and we helped. We took care of it. How's Afghanistan look? You want to know a little secret? How you think Ukraine's going to look? If you're a citizen of a country that's not a first world country and the United States military or politicians are coming in to help you, run. I thought it was funny. Remember Trump said shithole countries and everyone lost their mind. There's so many things about that story we could rehash again. I don't know much about Ukraine, do you? I don't know. Try me. What do you know about Ukraine that I don't, Webmaster? Go ahead. I would love to be educated. I knew Ukraine's been one of the most corrupt countries in the world for years. I know that it's bantied back and forth between basically being a vassal country of Russia and the United States. I know government entities in Ukraine have done terrible shit to people, including Christians. I know that they locked up an American citizen, Gonzalo Lira, for basically free speech, and he died in prison. But go on, tell me what I need to know about Ukraine. I know how it's going to end. We'll see who's right. You tell me how you think it'll end in Ukraine, and I'll tell you how I think it'll end. And we'll see who's right. Here's how I think it'll end. I think inevitably, just like in Afghanistan, we'll decide, okay, there's another area of the world to be in where we could funnel money and have kickbacks to U.S. interest and politicians' interest. And so we'll leave. And I think just like Afghanistan, you'll see the leaders of Ukraine will end up incredibly wealthy and they'll be well-to-do. And I think what you'll see is the people that will have suffered the most and continue to suffer the most are the average people in the ground in Ukraine. Webmaster would like to call in? Sure. Let me get my Discord open. Let me find a damn thing. Now my computer would probably blow up here trying to do Discord, but we'll give her a go. All right. We'll put the invite here. Oh, there you go. You're in. Let me just check my settings real quick, Webmaster, to make sure my I'm using the right microphone here on it. Okay. Check. All right, we good. Can you hear me, Webmaster? Oh, good. All right. You sound nice and clear. I think your mic sounds better than mine. Yeah. So, okay. What am I wrong about Ukraine, or what do you think that I don't know that I need to know? Mm-hmm. It's fair.
Number one, you cannot compare it to a lot of countries just because the education level is a lot higher in Ukraine than pretty much every other country you mentioned before.
That's true. I would say that's Ukraine is more adjacent to a sort of second world country than a country like Afghanistan or Libya would be. I think that's fair.
Now, calling Ukraine second world country is a little bit of a stretch because number one, education level, number two, production before war. The production was the highest. Suddenly the whole world realized that Ukraine is one of the biggest food producers in the world. The war in Ukraine started and half of Africa started dying. Surprisingly, everybody found out where Ukraine is located on the map. And
yeah, but that doesn't make it I'll grant you that people could have different definitions of first world and second world country. When I would say a first world country, I have that as a exclusive group of people. So that would be United States, Canada, probably Mexico would be there. Then you have your European countries, such as those that would be in the EU. Many of them like Spain, the UK, the Norwegian countries, etc. Countries like Japan. I don't think Ukraine's on that tier. Ukraine...
Definitely not.
Yeah, so that when I say second world, I don't mean it necessarily as an insult. What I mean is a developed country that's still developing, but it's not to the level of a first world country. Now, I don't know what the actual... maybe the people that look at foreign policy more than me would disagree and say, then we would think that we would call them a first world country as well. But I think everyone would admit that it's a step... It's not quite to the level of these European and Western countries that I'm talking about. But there are significant problems in Ukraine going back a long while, even with the positive things you said. For example, there are significant problems with corruption. Even if we take the official United States military intel agency line on this, Ukraine, horribly corrupt country until at least 2014, I would argue well after as well. basically operating as a vassal state of Russia, where there's credible accusations that Yanukovych, the president at the time, was basically a puppet of Vladimir Putin. There's also credible evidence, in my opinion, that Poroshenko, his predecessor, was basically a puppet for the Obama administration, the Obama State Department. And there are terrible things that happen in Ukraine, such as the jailing of religious leaders, political opposition, and then you had all sorts of crazy stuff that happened with certain battalions and what have in Crimea, where there's people that were involved in the Ukrainian military that were waging vicious attacks against their own citizens. So I don't think that it is necessary. I mean, I guess you can make an argument there's a lot of corruption in a lot of the Western countries as well, but I think you're right to differentiate it from a place like Libya or Afghanistan, but I wouldn't sell it so much that it was like, a Western country, a first world country.
So as far as you mentioned vicious attacks about own citizens by battalions, can you give a little bit more detail on that, please?
So like the Tornado Battalion, that the leader was arrested and then freed by Zelensky once Russia invaded, was accused and was jailed of raping and attacking people in Russian-speaking people in Crimea, I believe. You also had international news agencies that frequently talked about the Nazi problem of groups like the Azov Battalion in Ukraine previous to Zelensky coming into office and Poroshenko coming into office.
Well, when you are in war, whoever can fight against the invader fights against the invader. And it happens throughout the history where people in jails are released to fight against invasion army. Happened before in many places. Happened before in World War II, where in USSR people were taken out of prisons and sent to fight Germany. Happens to fight here.
Yeah, but it's one thing to say we're going to release average Joe Schmo prisoners. It's another to release people that were in paramilitary battalions in positions of leadership and release them to go out and fight, particularly if they've been accused of raping and murdering civilians in a military capacity. Like, for example, it's not like we're so desperate for troops that we're down to the last guy, so we have to release this guy. This guy was a leader in a paramilitary organization who raped and murdered citizens of Ukraine.
It's a kind of win-win situation, because you take a person out of jail, you take a criminal out of jail, right? You send him to the front lines. It's a win if he kills a lot of the enemies. He kills a lot of Russians, it's already plus. If he dies, I guess Ukrainian died, it's not that good, but as you say, a bad person, a criminal died, so it's not that horrific from the point of view from the government, and the government doesn't have to pay, keep him in jail, guard him, so it feels like win-win-win situation, unless you are saying, you know what, they released those people, none of them went to the front line, none of them went to fight, they all came back and started killing and committing crimes. But in most cases those were not the case. People that got released got to the front lines and were fighting, and a lot of them died.
Okay, but again, I don't agree with the releasing of him, but even if you would somehow say it's such a desperate situation, we have to release what Ruslan Onyshenko was his name, was accused of the rape of minors. Tornado Battalion was a military-backed battalion in Ukraine.
I mean, I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that bad people didn't get released. What I'm saying is, when your country is the brink of being conquered, anybody and everybody who is able to fight goes to fight.
That's not
Same thing is happening in Russia right now, where they recruit people, anybody from jail that you can, and you send those people to fight.
Again,
Same thing somebody is mentioning in your chat. In 40s in Germany during World War II, when the USSR army was actually on offensive and not defensive anymore, and Germans were running out of troops, they were sending people from jails to fight as well.
I don't think
I understand that you are trying to differentiate, oh, this guy committed minor crimes and this guy committed crazy crimes, but trust me, when an invading army is coming and somebody is either fighting between you and them or not fighting, you would rather have somebody with a gun trying to defend your country.
Okay, two things. One, again, it wasn't to the point when this person was released that they were so desperate that they were down to the last man. Secondly, even if I would concede that point, which I don't, he shouldn't have been released by Zelensky, it doesn't change the fact that what I said was, what we were talking about was corruption in Ukraine prior to Russia's invasion, right? And so
Corruption in...
Let me finish, please. Let me finish.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
So these sorts of things, military leaders in the Ukrainian government torturing, raping, murdering minors and their own citizens. This is one of the reasons that Crimea isn't as simple as it's made out to be, right? There were a lot of people in Crimea that actually would have preferred to go back to Russia. There was a lot of tension in that area, and the Ukrainian government wasn't treating some of those people in the best way. That's why there were, sympathies with Russia by a lot of these people. You're just focused on, well, that might be true, that, there were these heinous acts being taken by government officials, etc. But the fact that they release them now, they're just desperate. They have to release everyone, including former military leaders that are child rapists. I disagree with that point, but even if I would concede that point, it doesn't address the overall point that I was making, was that there was significant accusations of corruption in Ukraine. It was considered one of the most corrupt countries in Eastern Europe, one of the most corrupt countries in all of the region, to be honest, for years and years and years prior to Zelensky coming into office. In fact, some would argue that's exactly why they would be willing to vote for a stand-up comedian, was because the people were so tired of corruption of their ruling class.
I totally agree with you about the corruption, and it comes since USSR. In USSR, everybody was corrupt, starting from the regular police officer to any person in power and going up all the way to the president. It was a problem in USSR, it was a problem in 90s when Ukraine, USSR split, and it's still a problem, and I hope that Ukrainians are working on it, and it is a problem that is... You're absolutely right. There is nothing to debate about that.
So
now, as far as Crimean people wanted to go to Crimea, in general, you're probably correct. But then again, you have to understand the history of Crimea and what people live in Crimea. Original people got killed. Original people got deported. Russians were moved in, so naturally Russian people want to be part of Russia, because you would hear Russians saying, "Oh, Crimea was Russia." It's absolute bullshit. Before Russia, Crimea was Ukraine. Before Ukraine, Crimea belonged to USSR. Before USSR, Crimea belonged to Russian Empire. Before that, it belonged to Crimean Tatars. Before that, it belonged to Greeks, to Turks, to Romans. That land was occupied multiple times and belonged to multiple races, multiple countries before that. And there were Tatars living, Crimean Tatars, Greeks, Turks, Ukrainians, and in 40s a lot of Tatars were picked up and moved by Stalin regime to, I believe, Kazakhstan, somewhere there, and Russian people moved in. So naturally, all those people, yes, they want to be part of Russia. So it's not surprising, and partially, yes, it's because Crimea was not treated as favorably as Kyiv, but partially it's because those people are Russians.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. I will claim ignorance as to going back 200 years as to the history of Ukraine. My knowledge of sort of the political landscape of Ukraine is very limited, both prior to and after the invasion from Russia. So I'll fully admit that. However, I know some key facts, right? I know that what I'm talking about is true, that the United States and NATO aggressed against Russia. They did so in multiple ways,
Well,
including the expansion of NATO. Just let me finish real
okay.
quick. And then including things like bombing Assad, one of Russia's big allies. Regardless if they instituted a color revolution in 2014 through NGOs or if they just took advantage of that to help install someone that was more favorable to the United States, this also was seen as an act of aggression against Russia because they felt Ukraine was a key ally with Yanukovych there. There were difficult situations occurring in the Crimea. I have no love for Vladimir Putin or Russia. I wish that the war would end tomorrow and they would go home with the tail between their legs and Ukraine would win. That's how I honestly feel. However, Ukraine is a horribly corrupt place, and unfortunately, their leaders will do the people of Ukraine no favors. The best possible outcome in this would have been try to negotiate for, even if it wasn't from a position of strength, to try to negotiate and have the United States have the back of Ukraine at the onset. Instead, because places like the United States, Germany, the UK, and elsewhere, other NATO countries, push for this conflict to continue, the people that will suffer the most are Ukraine. And the comment I was making, and we'll see if you disagree, it seemed like you were saying I needed to learn more about Ukraine. The point I'm making is the end result of this will be much like that of Libya and Afghanistan. Eventually, there will no longer be the political will in the United States or in these European countries to finance this conflict over and over again. So they'll find some excuse to get out that'll seem like a compromise, and the people that will suffer that compromise will be very similar to what it would have been 2 years ago, and the people that will have suffered the most would be the average Ukrainian citizen. Meanwhile, companies like BlackRock and Halliburton will end up investing in Ukraine and getting very wealthy. The people that will gain the most are the people in the United States, the military-industrial complex type people, the politicians, and the people in leadership of Ukraine that are going to walk away with yachts and huge amounts of money. And the people that will lose the most are the average citizens of Ukraine. That's how this story will end. Might be a year from now, might be 10 years from now, like Afghanistan was. But that's how it'll end.
All right, so multiple follow-up questions, at
Sure.
least a couple of questions from me. Number one, you said something about expansion of NATO infringing. Can you please be a little bit more specific on that?
Yeah, so NATO's been expanding eastward ever since the fall of the Soviet Union. NATO originally existed as a military alliance, sort of to buttress against the Soviet Union and their allies. With the fall of the Soviet Union, there were agreements that were reached that NATO wouldn't expand westward or eastward. Putin even said in his interview with Tucker Carlson, which I'm not saying that I believe this or not, but it sounds plausible, that Russia was actually interested in joining NATO. They're like, sure, we'll join that as well. But what they're worried about is the encirclement. They're worried that over and over that NATO is going to keep pushing closer and closer to the borders. And they have right to be fearful. It seems that that's exactly what's happening. Not only that, you can see military action being taken closer to closer, such as the bombing in Syria. And one of the things that's rarely talked about is these biolabs that apparently we're told the United States have been helping Ukraine dispose of biological weapon material since, I believe, 2004 or 2008. And yet for some reason we're still there. The New York Times piece that just came out here admitted that the United States is running 23 military bases clandestinely in Ukraine. So if you're Russia and you look
Since what year? Military bases in what year?
2020, when the invasion occurred, at the onset of the invasion.
All right.
I don't know when they were built, but go ahead.
Okay, fine. So one step at a time.
Sure.
All right. Okay. So you said NATO is expanding. So if I understand correctly, NATO is an aggressive military alliance that conquers country after country after country, right?
That's not what I said.
Well, that's how I understand. You said they're expanding. How are they expanding?
Most of the expansion is through diplomacy of getting countries to agree to allow NATO troops or weapons in, or getting more countries to join NATO.
Okay. So, couple of things so you ought to understand. Questions that should be asked, number one, is why every country that was part of the Soviet bloc, or every part of Soviet Union that no longer part of Soviet Union wants to get as far away from Russia as possible and join the NATO? That should be question number one. Number two, when you said the promises were made to Russia and whatever Putin is said is Putin is lying, because here's what the promises were made. The promises were made that no military would spread eastward. Nobody said about other countries joining NATO. The conversation was when East and West Germany was joining, and when I believe it was Gorbachev, when he didn't want to take the Russian troops out of East Germany, he was promised that, because he said, we take out the troops and then NATO troops would get into East Germany. And he was promised that no troops will ever go east where they are. If you look at the history and if you look at what happened, any single country that joined NATO, there were not a single base open. There are no military bases in any new countries. There are no offensive weapons moved, no missile system, nothing offensive moved prior to 2014, prior to Russia invading Ukraine. Nothing. And if I know, I understand that you don't listen to Putin much in general. One of the biggest things that Putin was talking, his biggest talking point about NATO expanding was, flight time of nuclear weapons to capital of Russia. And you have to have a proof that, you know what, these countries joining NATO, they're moving missile launchers, they're getting closer, they're about to attack us. Nothing of that happening. You would not see NATO ramping up production. You would not see NATO moving its troops there. Before the war, before 2014, there were like 300 NATO troops in Eastern Europe, something like that. And now there's like 20,000 or something, a lot more than that. So,
I don't believe
to fear
you.
something you have.
So if I could jump in, I don't believe you won. I don't believe you because I don't think you would have access to that. For example, if I would have asked you a month ago, was the United States operating bases inside of Ukraine, you would have probably said probably not. Now it's reported that that actually was the case. For example, Russia has accused the United States of aggression before and militarizing people on the border of Russia before, and the United States in the official narrative vehemently denied it. That would have been particularly in the late 70s, early 80s with the arming of the Mujahideen that were viewed as terrorists that were attacking Soviet interests. And the Soviet Union routinely accused the United States of arming the Mujahideen, which the United States vehemently denied and said, no, we wouldn't train them, we wouldn't arm them, we have nothing to do with this. We later found out that that was exactly correct. That's exactly what was going on. The United States was arming the Mujahideen, which would later become the Taliban, which would spawn Osama bin Laden, and then further lead to the erosion of our rights through the Patriot Act after 9/11. So even if you were correct, Russia, you could say, oh, no. Russia should have been totally happy that the military alliance, whose sole reason for existing was to basically counter them, all of a sudden that military alliance is not only expanding and coming eastward to other European countries, but it's actually now incorporating former Soviet Union countries. But Russia should have been totally cool with it because trust NATO. Even though these countries are in this military alliance, no NATO troops would ever set forth. It doesn't matter if they did set forth at the time, which again, you won't be able to prove that there was an absolute guaranteed proof that no NATO troops were there, only a handful of them. What matters to Russia is they could. Once these groups were in the military alliance, and that alliance is going up, bridging onto the border of Russia, that means that the nuclear capabilities of the NATO country, the military capabilities of the NATO countries, could rapidly be deployed in those countries, and any fighting back of Russia would be declared an act of basically world war against every single NATO country. And so they would rightfully view this as encircling. Particularly when you look at the actions of the United States elsewhere in the region, such as Syria. Now, granted, this is way after 2013, though not a lot after, I guess, where you see actually the United States has a military presence in Syria, and they're actually bombing the ally of Putin, who is Assad in Syria. Then when you factor in bases and what have in Ukraine, and you see the 2014, which Russia's going to look at as the United States meddling to remove a pro-Russian president of Ukraine and install a pro-American, you can see how Russia would be paranoid about these actions. Top that off with people, as you've already admitted, in the Crimea region that probably had sympathies towards Russia, who are being treated like shit by the Ukrainian government, the now pro-US Ukrainian government, and you can see why it's a powder keg. Now, that doesn't mean I think Russia should have invaded. That's not what I'm suggesting. But what I'm saying is the story's much more complicated than Russia's just bloodthirsty heathens that invaded just because they could, and the expansion of NATO was purely innocent and had no military intentions whatsoever. I do not believe that.
Okay. Obviously you don't have to believe that. However, you said there are no proofs. I do believe there are transcripts of the meeting between Gorbachev and Kohl. Oh, I forgot who was the German minister over there at that time. You can probably find those, and that's where you can get that information. But besides that, just because somebody is getting closer, and as I said, Russia should try to figure out why those countries want to join NATO. Promises were not made to Russia, and NATO alliance was not made against Russia. NATO alliance was made against USSR. And NATO alliance was pretty much falling apart prior to 2014. Lack of funding, nobody wanted to do anything, no country wanted to contribute, so Russia wanted the excuse. Now, what you are saying is that making Russia that bloodthirsty country, yes, it is that bloodthirsty country. Look at the history of whatever happened in every other country. Abkhazia versus Georgia. Somehow in Abkhazia there were a bunch of troops, bunch of Russian arms out of nowhere. Then Moldova, Prидnestrovye, for some reason there is a Russian army standing there right now. Georgia got occupied twice in 2008, and so it keeps happening. It keeps happening. You know what's the definition of insanity? Trying to deal with Russia and expecting a different result. And everything's still happening. Ukraine got in 2014, and because we had an absolutely awful president, we didn't act on it properly, and now we are having the issue that we are having instead of dealing it in a fairly soft and easier manner. Now we're on the brink World War III, I guess. And whatever you are saying about Assad, I really doubt that it has anything to do with Ukraine. Like, absolutely zero to do with Ukraine. Because I know you don't listen a lot about Putin's speeches and a lot of his conversations with people that know him. One of the things that Putin mentioned multiple times is what would be my legacy when I'm done. And his legacy was okay, but not amazing. And one of the things that he's trying to do, he's trying to put pretty much Soviet Union back together. So Assad and Syria, it might affect that region, but as far as Ukraine goes, not affecting it at all.
I disagree. And what it is you're looking at a very one-sided approach. For example, let's say you're talking to me and I'm streaming from Libya right now. And I could say, you know what the definition of insanity is? Dealing with the United States and thinking the outcome will be different. Do I need to go through a list of countries since the 40s that the United States has invaded? Would that prove that you can't trust them? That they're seen as aggressors? Is what the United States did in Syria or Libya or Afghanistan or Iraq or any of those countries, is that considered acts of aggression and invasion that would require military buildups to defend against? Should the rest of the world engaged in a military alliance to send troops to, for example, to Syria to protect against U.S. aggression? Should they have sent them to Libya to protect against NATO and United States aggression? Or is it okay when the United States violates countries' sovereignty?
I'm not saying it's okay, and a lot of those places, a lot of those wars, I don't know much because, let's just say I'm not from there. About Ukraine, I know a lot more about Ukraine, and I know a lot more about the history of Ukraine and how some things happened. And you were mentioning that NGOs started something. What do you think? NGOs brought 500,000 people to the center of Kyiv when suddenly Yanukovych decided that he is not going to join European Union like people of Ukraine wanted to do, and instead took $3 billion bribe from Putin and said that they're not joining European Union. or probably because there were some peaceful protesters that were protesting in the main square and got shit beating out by police, and that's why their parents came in, and that's how a lot of that started. What, you think somebody came in with cookies, whatever her name was, I forgot, everybody's saying there's a video of the lady from US walking around with cookies. Well, you think those cookies brought those 3, 4, whatever, 100,000 people to the main square? Yeah.
No, well, again, maybe as someone who's not familiar with the actions of the United States government, you're unaware of how color revolutions work. So the way this works is you could take almost any country, even first world countries, but certainly ones that don't rise to that level of first world, that have corruption, and you could throw a dart and hit a country on the map that would have a lot of dissident people in that country. Because a lot of these countries are ran ways that are corrupt or inept, and there is certainly large pockets of people in each of these countries that, given the opportunity, absolutely would coalesce and try to remove the government through peaceful or non-peaceful means if they thought it was better for their people. What the United States does, in Western countries, what they do is selectively choose the ones that they think would be beneficial for them to have regime change, and then they facilitate through NGOs and other instruments that regime change occurring. So do I think the people in Kyiv that were upset with the Yanukovych regime were all faking it? No, I don't think that at all. I think they had probably very good reason to be upset. But that doesn't mean that the United States wasn't helping facilitate that change, and to the level that maybe you could say they didn't need to help facilitate, that they were ensuring that the direction that change would occur would be a direction that was beneficial to the United States. This would be similar, like, for example, would you agree with this? There are a lot of accusations of corruption in the country of Mexico. Would you agree with that?
Definitely.
So let's say some non-government organizations from China that were heavily paid by the Chinese government and had former intel members of the Chinese government helped starting to facilitate a color revolution in Mexico. Now, they wouldn't need to pretend and pay people with cookies to get people upset with the government of Mexico. There's probably a lot of people in Mexico that have good reason to be upset with the government of Mexico. But China helps direct that through these NGOs and then installs a president that is antithetical to the United States and very pro-China. Do you think the United States government would be happy with that?
Happy, probably not, but I really doubt that the US government will start occupying Mexico.
They'd probably use more sophisticated tools than a military operation. But let's up the ante a little. Let's say that we then find out that China was operating 23 clandestine bases. And not only that, they also were operating labs within 50 miles of the border of the United States that included biological weapon agents. What do you think the United States would say about that?
I don't know what United States about that, but so I know that a lot of people are experts that you talk to who are following this for the whole 2-3 years. I'm not an expert. I only follow the situation probably for about 20 years in general.
Well, hey, you probably know more about the specifics of the region than me, so don't sell yourself short.
Yeah, I'm
not claiming to be an expert.
So couple of things. Number one, if some of the things that you were saying would be the case, like for example, NATO troops or NATO missiles would be installed in newly joined countries, there would be a lot of Russian articles, because I read Russian news, listen to Russian news outlets, Ukrainian news outlets, and I haven't heard anything. Before 2014, before the invasion, not a single word that, you know what, yeah, NATO is expanding, but I haven't heard, oh, you know what, here's a bunch of missiles installed, here's a nuclear missile launcher installed in Poland and stuff like that. None of that were happening. If the biolabs were used to, let's say, and in Russia they were saying, there are biolabs that are targeting just Russian population. Russian population, Ukrainian population, you can't find different. You line up 100 people, you would not be able to identify between Russians and Ukrainians. But before 2014, not a single mention. I mean, I don't read every single thing possible, but I don't remember any kind of screams on Russian news saying that, oh my God, there are these Ukrainian labs, biolabs that are doing. Everything started after 2014. Nothing was before 2014.
Well, I just don't agree with that. For example, you acknowledge that Turkey is a NATO country, correct?
Technically.
Technically. Okay. Did you know that I just looked this up, but I knew it was close. Now, I'm very bad with geography, but I have a general idea of the region. So I knew that Turkey's pretty close to Russia. You agree with that, right? My reading of it says 380 kilometers.
All right.
Did you know that since 2009, there have been at least 50 nuclear weapons from the United States stationed in Turkey?
Since what year?
2009. So
what said, year? Hold on. What year did Turkey join NATO?
They joined early. Shit. Let me look here real quick. I'm thinking it was in the 60s.
So,
1952.
As I said,
1952.
Okay, as I said, there were no nuclear weapons deployed in the countries that joined NATO after East and West Germany combined. So naturally, some NATO country decide to, whatever, if US decide to install nuclear weapons in other NATO countries, it's possible. But that's not what I said, did I?
Right. Well, you did. You said that there weren't weapons stationed that close and that Russia wasn't talking
No,
about
that's not. I said that there were no weapons stationed in any countries that were joined to NATO since 1992 or
that is a point you made, but I thought the point you had just made was that there was no weapons that were close to Russia in any of these NATO countries. I thought
that's included.
Not. Okay,
no, that's not what I meant.
Then okay, I'll accept that, but still, this disproves the point you were trying to make earlier. Which your point was, well, Russia had no reason to be concerned about the expansion of NATO countries because it wasn't leading to an expansion of troops or weapons. But if in 2009 these weapons, nuclear weapons, then get to the border of Russia, that would have been a different situation that would be seen as an escalation, correct? Because previous to 2009, Turkey did not have these nuclear weapons. In 2009, NATO sends 50 nuclear weapons. I don't know if it was NATO or the United States specifically. I think it's the United States military, stationed 50 nuclear weapons in Turkey. How would this, like you said that the problem would be weapons being moved there, not necessarily additional countries moved. So one, doesn't it prove that weapons were moved there? And second, doesn't it prove that the countries that are former Soviet Union states that are now joining NATO could just up and decide to have troops or nuclear weapons moved there at any given notice?
Why would somebody have to check with Russia where to move their weapons?
That's not the point. The point is from the perspective of Russia. So if we're looking at it from the perspective of Russia and you see NATO expanding, right? And I said that worries Russia. They don't like that. And you said, why would Russia be worried? It's not as if troops or weapons are moving closer to her. It's just countries engaging in a diplomatic relationship. But there was no aggression in the forms of troops moving. And I'm like, yes, but they see the nuclear weapons moving 380 kilometers off their country into Turkey. So why wouldn't they say now all of these other countries, for example, Moldova, Bulgaria, etc., why couldn't they also station weapons and encircle us at some point? And your arguments, I don't understand your argument as to why they wouldn't see it that way.
Because number one, there are probably nuclear weapons, I believe, in Germany, and Germany is closer to Moscow and St. Petersburg than Turkey. If I remember geography correctly, I might be wrong, but I believe it is. So if you're trying to, if you're trying to tell me that the nuclear weapons are getting closer to Russia, it's not the case because it's already closer to Russia. If it's in Germany,
why do you think that the United States put nuclear weapons in Turkey in 2009?
Probably to have a better control of Middle East.
Just middle, but you don't think so? You're thinking that those nuclear weapons would be considered sort of a deterrent to possible actions with hostile Middle Eastern.
Let me ask you a question. Mm-hmm. Imagine there is two neighbors, neighbor A and neighbor B. Neighbor A finds out that neighbor B bought a gun. Is neighbor A justifiedly fearing that neighbor B is going to come and kill him and in turn goes back and kills neighbor B?
No.
Well, it depends. The answer is maybe. Because it depends what kind of relationship they have and what kind of threats and what happens throughout. So you don't see NATO attacking other... Hold on. You don't see NATO attacking other countries. You don't see NATO throughout the history didn't...
Syria.
NATO throughout the history didn't attack us. How many countries did NATO attack?
Libya, Syria, just in this past century?
Was it NATO or was it United States?
Libya, NATO.
I have to see whether it was a NATO decision. But in any case, Russia is the second biggest nuclear country in the world. And thinking that it would get attacked is just kind of crazy.
Yeah, Yugoslavia, says my friend Casimir.
Yugoslavia was not attacked by NATO. I believe the decision to attack Yugoslavia was UN decision. It was not NATO decision. It was executed by the countries that are part of NATO, but the decision was made in UN.
Okay, even if that's the case, even if we would just say that the invasions that we're talking about were only UN or US countries and not NATO specifically, I will say this: NATO was the governing body, I do believe, in Libya, for sure. And even if not, even like with Yugoslavia, I'd have to look into the specifics of it. From the perspective of Russia, it's hardly going to matter. So you have all these countries that are involved in political alliances of varying degrees, economic alliances of varying degrees, that are basically ran by the United States. They're the majority of the power, both hard and economic power, in those regions. And then they're in this military alliance called NATO. And you see all those countries involved in invasion of all of these countries around the world, sort of close to you in terms of Syria. And then you see the military alliance building up weapons close to your country, including nuclear weapons. And your response is that Russia would be like, oh, that was just the US that invaded Afghanistan and Syria, not NATO. So we're cool with the alliance that they basically control, the military alliance they basically control, getting even closer to our borders because, after all, it wasn't NATO, it was just the UN and the US that did those things. It doesn't seem to make sense. And let me also, if you don't mind, if you're still there, let me go back to your analogy, right? So your analogy, of course, you could say that with anything. Like I could say, your neighbor gets new running shoes. Does that justify you to be afraid of him and shoot him? You would be like, of course not. And I'd say, it depends, because there could be specific details that we could add to this. The mere fact that your neighbor, at least in my country, exercises their fundamental right to keep and bear arms doesn't justify you making an act of aggression against them, right? It wouldn't do that. Similarly, though, if we go with the example that you're trying to give, if we see that Russia is concerned with the military alliance and buildup coming closer, and not just that, secret bases from the United States that they're running in Ukraine, military-grade biolabs, right after the pandemic, where a U.S.-funded biolab in Wuhan released something that not only hurt the world, but also hurt Russia as well, you would clearly have reason to be paranoid. Now, again, this is important. Let me finish this last point, right? When you talk about would you be justified in doing something, remember, my stance is Russia was not justified to invade, and I don't want Russia to win. So don't mistake me for saying, all of this gives Russia the moral clarity and the legal justification for invading. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it's not as simple as one side's the good guys and the other side's the bad guys. This was intentional provocations over and over by NATO and the Western world.
Well, in all the stuff that you're mentioning, labs and bases and all the other stuff happened after 2014, right? After the war started. Because for some reason, you think the war started in 2022. The war did not start in 2022. The war started in 2014. In 2014, Ukraine was occupied. In 2014, Crimea was occupied. In 2014, Eastern Ukraine was occupied. And Ukrainian soldiers were dying, Ukrainian people were dying almost every day throughout those years. And this is just Russia got together, Russia gathered the troops, and they started another invasion. Before that, it was invasion of Georgia, then it was invasion of Crimea, now it's invasion of the other part of Ukraine, and thinking that you can make peace with Putin and hope and pray that is not going to happen again is insanity.
Okay, so I keep catching you in things that, like, you keep going back to sort of the original narrative, even once things that you were saying are proven not to be true. For example...
Like what?
Okay, you said that there wasn't, like, the move of weapons closer to Russia prior to, and then when I said, actually, we see these nuclear weapons, you were like, I just meant the new NATO countries. Nonetheless, That occurred in 2009, which was, it then seems, I don't know if you're doing it intentionally, when you say, well, all of this stuff occurred after the war started in 2013. No, that occurred as a precursor. I am unsure of when the labs in the New York Times story, or not labs, the bases in the New York Times story, I'm unsure of when the United States first started to operate those bases. I'll look into that and see what the time is. I do know, on reporting that I've seen, that the biolabs that I'm talking about were... The United States was helping with those labs back in the mid to early 2000s. So that's well before the war you're talking about. So what you do is you lump everything together. You say, well, the biolabs and the bases and the expansion of NATO countries, that all occurred after the war started in 2013. That's not true. That's not.
So bases and troops in NATO, that's occurred after 2014 because there were no NATO troops in Eastern Europe before 2014, not at least at the level that it is right now. The bases in Ukraine, I don't know whether there are bases in Ukraine before 2014. Obviously, after 2014 there are some because, yes, Ukraine got invaded and somebody have to help protect them. What do you think what is your solution?
My solution would have been for the United States and NATO to sit down at the bargaining table with Ukraine and Russia and try to have some sort of guarantees that would be a compromise. I don't know exactly what Russia would have asked for. I'm guessing some sort of assurances that NATO would no longer expand, that there would be a demilitarization of some of the NATO countries closer to them in the forms of military bases, etc., in places that are right on the border of Russia, and some sort of, probably some sort of guarantee of some sort of economic relationship to ensure that there wouldn't be things like the sanctioning or the blowing up of pipelines like Nord Stream. That probably would have been enough, and probably you would have had to give up parts of Crimea, unfortunately for Ukraine. That would have probably been the best solution.
So you're perfectly fine to give up Ukrainian land to Russia?
Yes, I am perfectly fine for that.
Are you okay why? Because you don't want a nuclear war, right?
Yes, that would seem to be a good thing. But here's the thing.
So...
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so are you perfectly fine to part with Alaska?
No.
Why not?
Because Alaska is a part of the United States, which is negotiating from a position of strength. If the United States...
Hold on. It's not a position of strength if another nuclear country is going to start nuking and the world will be over.
But
because
it's not...
the way Russia operates, and as you can see, is it started a little bit here, it started a little bit there, then a little bit in Georgia, nobody did anything, everybody was sitting and looking, then a little bit in Crimea, occupied Crimea, then occupied eastern Ukraine, nobody was doing much, and now it's trying to occupy the whole Ukraine. And whatever the agreement you're going to have, because Putin himself signed the document saying that Ukraine is Ukraine and that's how it is. And after that he went and occupied Crimea. So you're gonna believe a person like that?
Again, so you're saying a lot here. Let me rebut you in multiple ways. First off, the United States is operating from a position of military strength vis-a-vis Russia, one which Ukraine was not doing. The notion that just because Russia has nuclear weapons, they'll just be like, by the way, give us Alaska or we'll nuke you, is absurd. They haven't even said that with Ukraine, right? They are fighting with conventional forces because they know that preemptive nuclear strikes would all but assure lead to the complete end of all of Russia. So that's not something that they're going to do. If they were in a position where they were in an alliance or the United States grossly falls apart or something like that, where the United States military has no chance through conventional means to stand up with Russia, then yes, in that situation, it might tragically be that the United States has to negotiate from a position of weakness in order to protect the lives of the United States people. Secondly, when we're talking about this, you already talked about some of these places in Crimea and other places. Many of the people that live there ethnically identified as being citizens of Russia anyways. This would be vastly different than Alaska. It is not as if there is a large portion of people in Alaska that pine for the days that Alaska was part of the USSR and Russia. Why? Because Alaska was never part of it. And it hasn't been an area...
What? Hold. How did Alaska become part of USA?
I believe... I don't know. Did they purchase it from Russia?
Exactly.
They did?
And I... Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
show me.
Alaska was Russia, and I know you don't listen to Russian media, but in Russian media, there is a lot of sentiment that the Tsar, whoever sold Alaska to Russia, to US, didn't have the right to do that, and that transaction has to be voided null, and it should be taken back to Russia.
So,
And you said that US is negotiating from the position of strength. You never negotiate from the position of strength if you are afraid of something. And US is constantly afraid of something. It was afraid in 2008, it was afraid in 2014, it's afraid in 2022, and it's going to keep being afraid of standing up to Russia.
Okay.
So we are going to lose Alaska. I'm your citizen.
Right.
So we are going to lose Alaska if it's going to go that way.
Okay, this is a completely nonsensical point. So the sale of Russia from Russia to the United States of Alaska occurred in 1867. That is completely different than talking about the dissolution of the USSR in the late 80s, right? So that's completely different. We're talking almost, 300 years ago we're going on now? Show me that you've already admitted in places like Crimea and other places in Ukraine, there are people that identified as ethnically Russian. Can you show me one news article, one YouTube post, anything of groups of people in Alaska identifying as ethnically Russian and pining for the days of return to Russia? Can you show me one?
I cannot show you one, but for Russia, for Russia it wouldn't matter.
It doesn't matter if it would matter for Russia. The point that you're trying to make is you're trying to compare these two areas. And anyone can see the disingenuous attempt. There is no comparison whatsoever to Alaska and its connection to Russia because Russia sold it in 1867 versus Crimea, which you started off this conversation admitting that the Crimean people were treated like shit by people in the Ukrainian government, and many of them identified as being Russian, ethnically Russian, and pined to go back. And also, the differences are the United States is operating from a position of strength. Your nonsensical point of, but people in the United States are afraid of nuclear war, therefore they're not in a position of strength, is such a dog shit argument that anyone could see with a precursor look. That would mean that no one ever is in a position of strength unless they're a complete psycho, because anyone who doesn't think that nuclear war is a scary prospect is a fucking idiot. But I'll turn the question to you. So the question you asked involving Russia, which was a horrible analogy and situation, was, would I be willing to give up Alaska because I suggested that parts of Crimea that were overtaken probably would have to have left to be Russia if we were going to have a peaceful resolution? You made it sound like that somehow makes me a coward or willing to give up pieces of land. My question to you is, how many Ukrainian men must die for you to be satiated? All of them?
If Ukrainian men would not want to die, that would not be fighting.
Well, many of them
are being... They would not be there right now, they would not be fighting.
Okay, so then just to be clear, you would be against the Ukrainian government rounding up people and forcing them into conscription, correct? You'd be against that, because clearly those men don't want to fight.
Well, at time of war, unfortunately, that's what you have to do sometimes, and in this case, that might be a necessity. That's my question. Since, let's say, other countries...
What country are you in, if you don't mind me asking? You don't have to tell if you don't want. You're not in Ukraine, though.
Florida.
Correct? You're in Florida. Okay, you're in the United States. So how many Ukrainians are you willing to die for your virtue signaling? Let's say that things don't go and it drags on for another year or two and Ukraine's not in any better position. How many of their men should be rounded up for you to feel good? Right? Because, hey, it's war. It's unfortunate. How many of them must be conscripted into service and die for you to feel good?
Okay, well, I'll answer that question. Mm-hmm. I would hope the war would end today. Unfortunately, it will not. It will just not. But people, whatever you are saying right now, people were saying same stuff in 2014. Let Russia have Crimea. Let Russia have this. Let's try to make some kind of peace. Let's not provoke Russia. Your favorite phrase, I think, let's not poke the bear, right? You try to use it often enough. And see where it leads us now? In 2014, nobody did anything. When Russia occupied Ukraine, nobody did anything. Everybody was afraid, everybody was looking, nobody wanted to do something, hoping it would end. And look, 8 years later, bunch of Ukrainians dying, bunch of Russians dying, because the world hold was sitting in their hands and not doing much.
Okay, so then my question to you is, how far are you willing to go? Let's say, how do you see this ending? Let's say it drags on for another 3 years. Now Ukraine is losing hundreds of thousands of more of their men, so they're running out of troops. Then what? NATO sends boots on the ground?
I don't have a solution.
Right.
I do know
That's
that.
right.
So I do know. So at least one of the solutions, and I know you are complaining a lot. You are complaining a lot about money sent to Ukraine, right? I heard that a lot.
I mean,
Trust
yes,
me,
money. Money. Yep.
I'm extremely unhappy that money going to Ukraine as well. I would rather money stay in this country, in my country, which is United States, and I live here, by the way, for almost 30 years.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was not trying to. I know you have an accent, but I was legitimately asking where you're from.
I was born. So you understand. I was born in USSR. I was born in Ukraine. I was born in Kyiv.
Okay.
But for about 30 years, I live in the United States.
Okay.
Almost 30 years. But as I was saying, dollar bills don't kill people. Dollar bills don't kill enemies. If US will send $1 trillion to Ukraine today, nothing would change. Literally nothing would change. What Ukraine needs instead of money, Ukraine needs weapons. And Ukraine needs real weapons. Not restriction. It's like, oh yeah, we're going to give you missiles that shoot for 100 miles, but you cannot shoot it toward Russia. You have to shoot it somewhere, and garbage like that. You want the war to end. You want to negotiate from the position of strength. Give Ukraine all the weapons that they need. Give Ukraine missiles that shoot 1,000 miles.
Give them nukes, right?
I mean, in general, if you think about Budapest Memorandum, that's how it all started. And Ukraine did lose nukes.
So you think, I'm just asking you, like, forget the memorandum. You're saying that we need to give them maximum firepower right now. So nuclear weapons.
Don't know about nuclear weapons,
Why?
But other than nuclear weapons, yes, maximum power.
No, see, but now you seem to be putting an artificial restriction. Your claim seems to be, we need them to go for broke. Do everything they can. But you draw the line at nukes. Why do you draw the line at nukes?
Yeah, because you don't want to start nuclear war. Because since Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, nuclear weapons were not used before. And you don't want to start precedent. Because there are other countries in the world that have nukes. And everybody is restrained knowing that if they use nukes, that country will most likely cease to exist. So no, you probably don't want to give Ukraine nukes.
Okay.
However, up to the nukes, everything else might be a good idea.
I think that you're right that there is a difference with nuclear weapons and more conventional weapons. However, the same premise of you don't want to escalate would also be why we're not going to send them the most advanced military technology. For two reasons. Because it could lead to an escalation, and that could lead to actually Russia then escalating and possibly using nuclear weapons if they feel threatened that much. Secondly, because many of the arms and munitions we send there, if history is any sort of determiner, we'll find out that those weapons end up in the hands of the very people that we claim to not want them. Then 15 years from now, if we send all of these weapons, and Ukraine still won't be in any better position, and it will still end in the very way that I said at the beginning of this. It will end with Ukraine, basically, eventually the United States will be backing out. Ukraine's people will be the ones that have suffered the most, and they're going to have a negotiation that will be spun as some sort of victory of Ukraine, but it won't be. It'll be no better than the deal they would have gotten in the get-go. Right? And instead, what we'll have 15 years from now is we'll be told that we have to go back into the region because many of the people we armed to fight Russia are now horrible terrorists that are attacking U.S. interests, which is exactly what happened in Afghanistan. The exact same thing. We were told the Mujahideen is great people. They're fantastic. Mika Brzezinski said, Mika's his daughter. Emil Brzezinski said, who was in the State Department at the time, he wrote a book called Grand Chessboard. And while he was doing a book tour talking about this book, they asked him in like 98, 99, they said, do you feel bad arming these groups and training them that ended up becoming the Taliban? And he said, no, we gave the Soviets their Vietnam. It was worth it. Then we had to pass the Patriot Act to fight the very terrorists that were armed by our very military, by sending training and weapons. That's all we were sending, training and weapons. So it's a bad idea. Look, there is an argument that a unipower should sort of be the world police, but only if that unipower is operating in a malevolent and competent way. And the leadership and intel agencies in the military-industrial complex in this country have shown themselves to be corrupt and incompetent over and over and over. We made the Taliban one of the biggest air forces in the region due to our incompetence of sending trillions of dollars, including weapons, over there and then fleeing with our tail between our legs. So I don't think that the answer is to provide even more crazy munitions to Ukraine. I think the munitions we're already providing have exacerbated the situation, and providing even more lethal ones. One, the U.S. can't afford it, and we're already diminishing our stockpile now. And secondly, there's no evidence that this would be able to turn the tide. You yourself have admitted, like, I'll just ask you, let's say we send whatever the most badass conventional weapons. You admit that it would take time to train the Ukrainians on how to use these weapons, correct?
Well, yeah, I heard that story before, because in the beginning it was, not gonna give Ukrainian anything, let's hope they lose. And then, okay, let's give them some anti-tank missile launchers. Alright, well, Ukraine is not losing, let's try something else. Let's give them artillery, 777, 3-axis, that type of artillery. Alright, let's see, what else can we do? Alright, let's try to give them some other missile systems. Okay, well, it's gonna take them forever to learn how to use Patriots. Oh, look, they suddenly learned how to use Patriots. Now they're using Patriots and shooting down Russian planes, using US Patriots to shoot down Russian planes. Now, you know what? It's gonna take them forever to learn to fly the plane. Oh, look, they now know how to fly F-16s and probably going to start using them. Before that, we are never going to give Ukrainians a single armored tank, because this is now Ukraine has armored tanks from Britain and from United States and from other countries. So if a lot of that would have been done 2 years ago, if the training started right away, not waiting for Russia, because here's the difference between Russia and the whole world. The whole world is trying to have this end as quickly as possible, and is trying to not help Ukraine much. Russia changed all their manufacturing just to do arms production, and they're all in. That's what they're doing, and they're invested. And if you think that you're going to make a peace and it's just going to sound like, instead of making guns we're gonna start doing bagels, it's not happening.
So
just not.
Okay, look, you see.
So what you hold on. So one more thing. So when you are saying that it's going to take a lot of training, probably, but that should have been done a long time ago.
Should have, would have, could have. It wasn't, right? And again, the things you talked about, such as the missiles that you're saying that they're now. What are you saying that significantly turned the tide in Ukraine's favor?
Of course it did. It
did.
Stopped Russia.
Wait! You just said that you have no clue how it ends. So now, why send more? If those... that's funny. From looking at the news of the area, I didn't see evidence. I see basically Biden and Zelensky begging to send more because Ukraine's in a dire situation. But you're saying no, Ukraine's significantly winning.
Because the Ukraine is in dire situation because Russia keep manufacturing stuff and Ukraine is running out of stuff. And if you're asking me if there is progress, there is progress because Russia didn't conquer Ukraine yet. And if you're going to stop doing that, if the whole world will stop helping Ukraine, yes, Ukraine will get conquered and that country will kind of cease to exist, more or less.
Okay, so then you seem to have this totally figured out. So let's say we adopt your plan and the West sends them B-52 bombers, they're sending them Abrams tanks, they're sending them whatever, aircraft carriers, whatever it takes. They're sending everything, right? How long does it take for Ukraine to win?
I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball to look at.
Ballpark. How do you see it ending? What happens? Russia flees with their tail between their legs in 2 to 5 years?
I don't know, about 2 to 5 years, 3 to 7 years, 6 months, not sure how long. But I do know that your idea is to make peace, which is an amazing idea, and I'm all for it. The problem is, we already tried that a few times. In 2014 we tried, and look where it led us.
We
So
didn't.
you,
We did, but you can't say we tried to make peace while simultaneously invading and bombing countries around Russia, continuing to expand NATO. Again, Russia would say the same thing. We tried to make peace. We tried, but the United States kept expanding. Now they put military bases. When did we make peace?
hold on a second. So why would Russia attack Ukraine? Attack one of the NATO countries?
Because they know if they attack the NATO country that they would not win that conflict.
So
and they don't really. They're not trying to get back.
Okay, so
NATO
right now it's Ukraine. Hold on. So right now it's Ukraine because it's not NATO country. Then it's Moldova. Then it's not NATO country. Then it's
Moldova
Belarus.
is a NATO country.
Since when?
Isn't it?
Moldova is a NATO country? There is some news that I didn't hear about?
Maybe I'm wrong about this. It appears you're right. Moldova's not NATO.
So just because those countries are not NATO countries, we United States, NATO, the whole world are just gonna sit and watch Ukraine
that's
and
exactly,
other countries be...
That's exactly what I'm telling you. I'm telling you that the United States should try to negotiate now to have a resolution where that doesn't occur. If you're out, like, again, the people, you're being told that if we would just send all this stuff, I wonder what you were saying 2 years ago about this. If we just pass this budget, Ukraine will turn the war. Were you one of the people saying the counteroffensive was going to be so successful?
I don't know how counteroffensive was successful, but the first one was very successful, and I do know that at least Ukraine was able to fight back. At least Ukraine didn't get occupied. At least Kyiv wasn't occupied. When my friend is standing on the balcony with a phone and showing me missiles that are flying toward Kyiv being intercepted, I know that that stopped, and I know that the help that was sent back then helped Ukraine to fight Russia. And yes, Russia got their ass kicked. All the offensive troops got destroyed, and they had to start bringing more. They had to start bringing troops from the eastern side of Russia. They had to start bringing troops from southern side of Russia. So yes, it was successful. It was extremely successful because 2 years ago, when everybody was giving Ukraine 3 to 5 days, and more than 2 years, Ukraine is still fighting. So yes, it's successful.
It wasn't successful. It didn't do anything. The problem is what you're saying. It's so funny you don't even realize what you're doing, right? You're like, we just need to give them more badass weapons. And it's like, okay, but when we were giving them weapons, right, you were probably the type of person saying, this is what's necessary to win. And when the counteroffensive was occurring, you said, yes, this is great, this is what'll win. And you're like, yeah, it was awesome, we did great. But then Russia just built more shit. So now we need to send more. Right, what you're doing is, you assume that Russia's just like, it's like, well, they'll stop producing now. Now, if the United States sends more badass shit, then they'll stop producing. Do you have any evidence whatsoever that the United States and NATO, if they send these badass weapons, will be able to be used by Ukraine to then outpace Russia's ability to have increased production, increased troops, etc., and Ukraine would be able to end up kicking Russia out in a way that they won't be able to do through some sort of peaceful negotiation that they could be doing now? You don't have any evidence of that. You can't tell me. You said it could be 6 months. It could be 7 years if we give literally every weapon requested. Every weapon requested to Ukraine, you said, could take 7 years of them constant fighting with the most sophisticated military technology in the world. What sort of damage would that do to the United States military, which would have to constantly be producing this stuff for 7 years? And you still have no guarantee. Because I'm telling you the way it's going to work, there is not the political will in this country to continue to ramp up to send hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine. I don't care if you say, well, it's not the money, it's going to weapons manufacturing. It doesn't matter. That's what's going on. It's a transfer of wealth from poor and working class people to the upper class in this country. And this country the leadership's more concerned with people in Ukraine than they are with the people of this very country. It will not end well. And what will happen is, the political class will divert their attention to Israel-Gaza or to whatever the new course du jour is. And the Ukrainian people at the end of the day are going to be left handing the bag. You can't show me one scenario where Russia leaves with their tail between their legs And the negotiations basically like, get the fuck out, Russia, and now we know you'll never invade anyone ever again. You can't get all the criticisms you made of why my potential wanting to have a negotiation now, which would be the best time, or wanting to have it years ago when it was suggested that there was attempts at negotiations that were sabotaged by Western interest. You can't give me any evidence that all of your criticisms of that, which was Russia would just lie and do it again. How will this end then? If you're not suggesting wiping Russia off the face of the earth, how do you prevent them from just building up and doing this again?
Well, same way you cannot show me how even making a peace will not start the war 2-3 years down the road. You cannot show me that.
Well, I can say that it's worth the effort instead of just sending the wealth of the United States perpetually, forever. What if it's
right? Because it should have been done in 2014.
Okay, but you just said this was your words, that if we sent all of the weapons you're suggesting today, if we relinquish and said, yep, it would take them some time to train, we don't know, but the war could then theoretically be over in 6 months to 7 years. That's what you said, right? In other words, what that says is you have no fucking clue, which is fine because I don't have
Absolutely,
a clue.
Of course. Right. I don't have a crystal ball to look at.
That's exactly the point, though. The point is, how long do you think the United States and the Western world can continue to keep up making the most sophisticated weapons in the world? Because we've already sent, 500 billion? It sounds like what you're suggesting is the equivalent of much, much more than that. Because you're saying the tech we're sending them now is basically inferior. So now we got to send the good shit that's going to cost way more money. And we might have to send it for 7 years. So what are we talking? 5 trillion? 10 trillion? And there's still no guarantee of victory. There's none. And even if there is a temporary victory, there's no guarantee that Russia won't build up and do the same 3 years from now. Which again would mean that we have to send infinite amounts of money for infinite amounts of time. It's nonsensical.
No. Wait. Hold on. If Ukraine, let's say, kicks the Russia back, right? Mm-hmm. Take back the Crimea, free up the eastern region, joins NATO, as you said, that Russia will be too afraid to attack a NATO country, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then that case is already solved. Then this is not a problem anymore.
So you're just suggesting make Ukraine a member of NATO?
That's what should have been done a long time ago. Yes.
Yeah, I think that would make the likelihood of a nuclear exchange more significant, and it would make World War III more significant.
Yes, absolutely zero chance of that.
There's zero chance.
I'm not sure why you are thinking that Russia is going to start nuclear war just because countries joining NATO. Why didn't Russia start the nuclear war when Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia joined NATO?
So would you have?
How is Ukraine different than Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia joining NATO, or Poland joining NATO? How is Ukraine different?
Because the Russian military is there now. That the people of Crimea, as you've already said, identified as ethnically Russian. Those people were being attacked by organizations within the Ukrainian government.
Bullshit! Stop! Nobody was attacked before 2014. Nobody was attacked in Crimea.
You want me to? Read?
There were no people dying in Crimea. It wasn't as much of a problem as you're making it to be.
Well, wait. You just said two things. You said there were no people dying, and now you're saying it wasn't as much.
Listen, people die everywhere, every day, all right? People die in U.S. every day.
Yeah.
So it's not like, if you are telling me that there was Azov battalion prior to 2014 was in Crimea killing Russians left and right, I'd like to see that.
Let me ask you this, right? Why did they invade Ukraine?
Because if you would listen to a lot of Russian media prior to 2014, so number one, I told you before that, so this is my view, I don't know whether it's correct or not. Putin was brought in USSR. Putin was a KGB person, and he was living working in that, serving in that great country. And then, in front of his eyes, the country is falling into pieces. And he has no control over it, and he cannot do anything about it. Then, he comes to power, and you, for some reason, start seeing all these things, like in Georgia and some other countries, that For some reason, there are some people that are suddenly Russians that want to join Russia, and there are Russian troops there. South Ossetia is occupied. Russian troops in Pridnestrovia in Moldova, and start happening in other places. And I truly believe that one of the Putin's visions is to try to get USSR back together, but not call it USSR, call it Russia, and keep it Russia and join the countries. If you look at some of his sayings a long time ago, two of his, I believe, greatest people in history is Catherine the Great and Peter the First, Peter the Great, and those people are the ones that made Russia great through the wars and joining other lands, and that's what I'm pretty sure he is trying to do. And between all the surrounding countries, Ukraine is the wealthiest one, Ukraine is the richest one, Ukraine has full access to Black Sea, Ukraine has the biggest grain production besides Russia, so if Ukraine conquers Russia, Ukraine will literally produce like 95 or whatever, 90, whatever, 80% of world grain, so they can dictate the prices and stuff. So that, I believe that is the reason. Whatever you're talking about Syria and whatever you're talking about NATO, some of it might be truth and might have some little effect, but that is not the general idea why he was doing it. He's doing it because he's trying to bring USSR back together.
Okay, so then you know the answer to the question you asked me previously. So the question you asked me was, well, why would Ukraine joining NATO all of a sudden trigger something different than the other countries that have joined NATO? They didn't become aggressive then. They didn't threaten nuclear weapons then. It is because the unique situation Ukraine is in geographically compared to Russia. They would see this as a provocation of war. It is a red line that they're probably unwilling to accept. This military alliance advancing into Ukraine. It's something that they've talked openly about previously. And the fact that you are able to just give a laundry list of reasons why Ukraine is unique would also answer your question.
All right, so that's fine, but what does it have to do with? So Ukraine prior to 2014 was not planning to join NATO.
Correct.
Was planning to join European Union, to be part of the trade union, to be able to freely travel. I don't remember, maybe they were thinking about NATO, but I don't remember too much talk about joining NATO. The talk was about European Union, getting rid of visas to travel within European Union, and everybody was happy. And obviously Russia was not happy that Ukraine is getting a little bit far away from their reach.
So what it looks like happened was, right, one, you saw that Ukraine was seen, even though it was independent, it wasn't a part of Russia, it was no longer part of the Soviet Union, it was considered a key ally. Do you agree with that? So when you say in 2000...
No, I don't agree with that. Ukraine was not key ally.
You don't think the leadership of Ukraine was seen as a key ally to Putin?
I don't know about the leadership. I know that Ukrainian people didn't like Russian people, and Russian people didn't like much of Ukrainian people. So, as far as key ally, I mean, yes, Yanukovych was ally of Putin, that's true, but as far as people go, that's the reason why people got on the streets and kicked Yanukovych out.
Again, the truth would be that the leadership of the country was seen as an ally to, and which is what matters, because the political decisions are going to be made by the leadership. Similarly, I could say, do you think Poroshenko was seen as an ally of the United States?
Wait, hold on. Political decisions would be made by the leadership, but carried out by the people. Mm-hmm. And political decisions that were done by Yanukovych didn't sit well with people. And people revolted, and that's how it ended.
Okay.
So just because you think that if Putin would decide with Yanukovych that they should attack like Lithuania or something, Ukrainian troops would go there, highly unlikely.
Okay, well, again, you're erroneous in thinking that. That would be like, for example, we could look at polling in the United States, for example, that says the majority of people don't like Congress. You agree with that, correct?
don't know whether the majority
I
of
think
people like or don't like.
the general congressional approval rating's always something around 20%.
Might be.
How about
Okay.
Biden? More people approve or disapprove of Biden?
Most likely disapprove.
How about Trump? Did more people approve or disapprove of Trump?
Every president and every Congress is always disapprove. When you get elected, it goes high, but then things don't change much and it starts going down. Happens all over the place all the time.
That's right, it does. And yet your point seems to be the leadership of a country doesn't matter. All that matters is the popularity and the opinion of the people within the country. So if the leadership of the country does things that the majority of the people of the country don't agree with, then it wouldn't be able to be done. But the United States itself disproves that. For the legislative branch itself, without even looking at the popularity of Trump, Biden, Obama, Bush, just the legislative branch that writes the laws, massive disapprovals and have been for years. And yet we don't say, well then, it's only the people that matter. They're the ones really passing the laws, not Congress. You would say that's nonsensical. Please, let me finish, right? The same would be true over there. The truth is that when it came to many policy decisions in the area, Putin and Russia thought that they could count on Ukraine and the leadership of Ukraine as an ally. To the ability of how popular before any sort of color revolution Yanukovych was, I'll admit to being ignorant of the situation. I've already admitted that there was probably massive upset with Yanukovych. But then the question I have for you afterwards, if you're going to say, well, the people took to the streets and they threw him out in his ass, so that proves they didn't like Russia. My question to you was his successor, Poroshenko, considered an ally of the Obama administration? A simple yes or no would suffice.
Well, after 2014, when Ukraine got occupied.
So you'll agree that Poroshenko was considered a big ally of the Obama State Department?
Yes, when your country is occupied and another country is providing some kind of aid, yes, they are your ally.
Great. Can you explain to me why they threw him out in his ass and elected a stand-up comedian who ran on the issue of corruption first and foremost? Doesn't that prove that the Ukrainian people weren't necessarily fans of the United States?
No.
But wait, that's what you said. That's what you said.
No. See, that's the thing. That's what United States has, and that's what Ukraine had. In United States, you don't like the president. In 4 years, people go on streets, not go to the voting booth, vote a different president in. They didn't like Trump, they elected Obama, or whoever the next president will be. Same thing in Ukraine. For some reason, they decided instead of Poroshenko to elect something that, by the way, Russia doesn't have. Russia doesn't have elections.
Okay.
Russia doesn't have democracy.
It doesn't matter.
Ukraine has democracy. So when you are talking, when you are talking about corrupted countries and this and that, at least in Ukraine there is democracy, unlike a lot of other countries in former USSR.
Is Zelensky banning opposition parties?
Which ones?
Several
the ones that are pro-Russian, the ones that support war and saying that Russians are supposed to kill more Ukrainians? Yes, you ban those people.
So then not democracy then. Because if surely the people would not vote for a party that wants to end the war, they would not vote for a pro-Russian party. So what's the harm of a democracy would be those people will get blown out. No one has support for them. Or could it be that there's a significant portion of people in Ukraine that would support those ideas?
Which ideas? To kill more Ukrainians?
So wait, so I just want to be clear. Your argument is there were people in political parties in Ukraine that had been long established that ran on not just we should try to negotiate with Russia or we should try to have some of this land go to Russia, but literally the platform they were running on is let's kill Ukrainians. Can you show me an article saying that?
A lot of people, so maybe
no, just an article. It's fine. Just send me proof. That's a bold claim. You're saying that there are political parties that were running on killing Ukrainians.
Hold on. No, obviously nobody running in political. But if you know a lot of people in from Ukraine defected to Russia with those statements, yes, a lot of people who Kyiv and some other people defected to Russia with a lot of those statements, yes.
I want to see a political party whose platform was kill Ukrainians.
Okay, Rob, you are trying to grab two words. You can grab two words. Maybe not exactly those, but the parties that are actively promoting Russian victory and want Russian to win, when you are in war and your people are dying, probably those parties should be banned. There is nothing bad
The
about that.
reason I'm focusing on those two words is because those were the exact two words you used to get out of the criticism that I was levying. So what I was going to say, this sounds closer to the truth. And I'll admit, I don't know the exact platforms, but my guess is there were probably political parties in Ukraine because there were people in Ukraine that had a more favorable view of Russia than maybe Zelensky or the pro-US factions in Ukraine. And so there were probably, as you've already admitted, for example, part of Crimea, there were a lot of people that identified as ethnically Russian that sympathized with Russia. So there's probably a lot of people that sympathize with Russia in that sense. Then there's probably a lot of people that were like, look, even if we don't like Russia, we want some sort of ceasefire. We want some sort of compromise, some sort of negotiation. My guess is those are the things that were getting banned. People that were criticizing Zelensky, criticizing the war efforts, and that would not be democratic, because the argument you're making is Ukraine's a democracy. They let their people vote. Banning those people would not be emblematic of a democracy. So the way you get out of that is say, of course, they banned political parties that were running on murdering Ukrainians, which is nonsensical. That's clearly, but let me finish. Let me finish. That's clearly not the case. Now, if it is the case, I think all of us would agree. A political platform in any country that is running on, let's kill the people of this country, probably wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to say, we're not going to let you run for office. But my guess is, with 95% confidence, that that's not what happened. That it wasn't that. And so when you say last sentence, when you say I'm focused on those two words, it's because it was the two words that were bullshit that you were using to try to get out of this argument that proves that it's not anti-democratic to ban dissenting parties.
When the war started, before the war started, right? Ukraine had how many elections? So every election was democratic. Nobody said that anything was not done the way it's done, let's say, in Russia, because in Russia democratic elections never existed. But in Ukraine, every single election, people elected who they wanted to be. Now, whether Zelensky oversteps here and there, I don't know all the details. Like, I probably have to go back and look at some things. But as far as the war effort, those are counterproductive. And making peace sounds like a good idea until it's not. And it was a good idea in 2014 until it was not in 2022.
Yeah, and sending weapons and encouraging Ukrainian men to die sounds like a good idea until it's not. And fortunately,
because the weapons were not sent.
Let me finish. Fortunately for me and you, that won't be us dying, but it could be you, because they're taking foreign people. So if you feel strongly about this as an American, you absolutely can go over there and do your duty to fight. Particularly if you were saying, hear me out here, you said you would, it's unfortunate but necessary to conscript Ukrainian men against their will to fight. You think that that's what needs to happen. So surely, as someone who's passionate about this, you would be willing to put yourself up for that.
Well, I'm U.S. citizen, and if U.S. would have to go to war, God forbid, and there's need for me to fight, I guess I would have to go fight. I would not have another choice.
Right. And as a U.S. citizen, I think that the tax dollars that I'm forced to pay, that's basically theft from me, should be going, if they're going to take that money, through the interest and the benefit of U.S. citizens. I see many, many problems when I look around that we could be dealing with in this country, not the least of which is the border. And yet, against my will, that money is being sent at clip. I said $500 billion earlier. That's bullshit. It's more like $70 billion that we've sent so far, right? Yeah. I see that money being sent over there, and I see it being done by institutions that clearly don't have the best interest of the people of that country at heart. Let me ask you that question. Do you think, regardless...
Hold on, 1 second. One comment. I totally agree with you. I told you in the beginning, I hate the money goes there. But I believe that we are responsible for what happened. I believe that Budapest Memorandum that was part of the agreement that Ukraine, which was only the third biggest nuclear country in the world, give up its nuclear arsenal for US and Great Britain protection, and when in 2014 got occupied and US didn't do anything, so now you're complaining about money going away. Why weren't you complaining in 2014 that Ukraine need to be protected in any way?
What? I'm sorry.
In every way possible. In every single way possible.
Why wasn't I saying that Ukraine needed to be protected in every single way possible in 2013? That's the question.
Yes.
Because I didn't believe it then, like I don't believe it now.
Okay.
I think instead of the United States being the world police and being beholden to protecting countries around the world, which is clearly only applied selectively and is always done with disastrous results, or the majority of the time with disastrous results, instead the United States should be focused back home and interested in causing no undue harm. But we seem to do the opposite.
And that is an amazing idea if it would be the case. Unfortunately, that is not the case. US is the world police, whether you like it or not, and in 2014 it didn't like it. And to take it to the next step, you know what US tried to do for last 80 years? Since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the biggest goal was to make sure that nuclear weapon would not get spread. The biggest thing was to make sure that other countries would not obtain nuclear weapon. And Iran is trying to get nuclear weapon. North Korea already got it. And you know that US was trying to negotiate for both countries to give up nuclear weapon, right? And things they were promised, since US would promise is like independence and we'll make sure we protect, and all those countries are turning around and telling US what happened with Ukraine. You promised Ukraine same thing, and well, look what happened. You didn't do much to protect them. You didn't do anything from Crimea to be taken away. You didn't do anything from eastern Ukraine to be occupied. And I can guarantee you that more and more countries will start working on nuclear weapons because they see that this is the only case to stay independent and not be invaded, but whoever feels like invading them.
It's actually the exact opposite. Most countries that are interested in getting nuclear weapon are those like North Korea, and the lesson they learned from places like Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, and a bunch of other places is the United States will eventually come in to take all your fucking shit unless you have a nuclear weapon. That's the lesson they learned. The arguments you're making right now are the exact same arguments that got us into the Iraq War. Well, we have to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons. We have to send the military in. Yellow cake, and maybe Bin Laden was friends with Saddam. We don't know. Just get in there. And you would have been saying the same thing back then. Oh, countries will learn the lesson then. That the United States is weak and you can do what you want and you can... It's the exact same type of warmongering arguments. The United States would have a better ability to negotiate from both a position of militaristic strength, economic strength, and soft power, sort of cultural and moral strength, had they not been engaging in all of these expansionist efforts to encircle places like Russia in the first place. If they weren't bombing Assad, if they weren't bombing Libya, if they weren't arming the Mujahideen and doing all of this shit, then perhaps they would have a moral leg to stand on. Which gets to the question that I wanted to ask you. Do you feel that the people involved with these decisions in the intel committees, our intel agencies, the military-industrial complex, and politically, do you feel in the United States those groups actually have the Ukrainian people's best interest at heart?
No.
Would they sell them out in a heartbeat if they thought it would harm Russia more?
Would you mean harm US more?
Russia or the US, because they would say that harming Russia is part of their agenda.
Well, if harming Russia would be their agenda, they're doing extremely bad job at that, because the sanctions are mediocre at best, and they're not being followed much, and the weapons that Ukraine is getting, it's getting like 6 months too late, and so harming Russia so I do believe...
Let's take harming Russia, since that's what you're hung up on, which is sort of a red herring to the issue. If the political class in this country thought that they personally benefited from throwing the Ukrainian people under the bus tomorrow, would they do it?
Probably yes.
Okay.
Because it was done before multiple times, couple of times.
So then the reason I bring this up is as follows. Knowing that, how isn't the argument you just made for the incentive to proliferate I assume that the Ukraine would know that as well, what you just said. I assume that every other country around the world would know that as well. So wouldn't they say, well, we know that these people, as soon as it becomes expedient, will throw us under the bus anyways. Even if they're helping Ukraine today, look how they left Afghanistan. Look how they fucking exploited Libya. Look how they'll help with the bombing of Yemen with Saudi Arabia. They selectively pick and choose which acts of aggressions are condemnable and which country they'll ally with and support acts of aggression when they feel like. So given that you've admitted that the people, and this is an argument I've long since made, I do not agree with the idea of the United States being the world police. But it would be more palpable if the people running the show were malevolent and were competent. But they're not. And even you're admitting that. They're not doing this because it's morally the right thing to do. They're doing it not because it's best for the citizens of the United States. They're doing it because they see personal benefit in them and the agencies that they like and that sponsor them. That's why they're taking these actions. And as soon as it becomes more profitable or more personally beneficial, they'll leave the people of Ukraine high and dry, which is exactly my prediction that started this discussion we're having. At the end of the day, I guarantee, no matter how long it is from now, we're going to be talking about how the people of Ukraine are left high and dry. And they got a fucking raw deal. That's how we're going to be talking.
And you might be correct, that's how it's going to end. However, if you are Ukrainian right now, and you see on one side you see Russians that are trying to kill you, that are coming and killing you, and on another side you have US that's giving you arms, which side would you prefer?
The side that's benefiting me now, but that doesn't mean that I'm dumb and don't
That's
realize...
exactly what Ukraine is preferring. Ukraine is losing people right now. People are dying right now. So they need arms right now. Not tomorrow, not in a week, not in a month.
What kind of nonsensical claim is that? Right, or nonsensical analogy. Of course that's true. If someone's punching you in the face and another person's not punching you in the face, which one do you prefer? That's not the question we're asking. The question we're asking is if they will perpetually have to rely on the United States and NATO for their existence, for possibly a decade to come, and any time that it would become profitable for the people leading those countries to say, you know what, we're done with this, we're going to go elsewhere, they'll throw you under the bus, that would probably mean that they have an incentive to try to reach a resolution as quickly as possible. And the only chance they have of getting a resolution as quickly as possible, because they do not have the capability of winning a war against Russia in the sense that Russia's just going to turn around and leave. So the best chance they have is some sort of negotiation. And we've seen reporting that suggests that actually people from Zelensky's administration were willing to sit down at the negotiating table, but were dissuaded from doing so by people like Boris Johnson.
One of the reasons. So Boris Johnson probably had effect on that, but one thing Zelensky saw that suddenly he had Ukrainian people fighting that nobody expected, probably not even Zelensky. He saw people on streets, people grabbing guns and fighting Russians all over the place. So that would be the reason. If you think that just because Johnson called and said, yeah, no, don't sign it, don't do that. Zelensky seen it done before. Zelensky seen Ukraine occupied 2014. Now Russia occupied again, built the bridge to Crimea and whole 9 yards, occupied another piece of Ukraine. Then you make an agreement with them, and then a year later they occupy again. Like what kind of agreement is that? You don't negotiate with people like that. There is no agreement to be made with Putin.
Okay, well
it's
then,
not.
So then, unless
every agreement you'll make with him, he will break.
That's what Putin will say. That's what Putin would say. He would say the agreements we've made with the West, with NATO and the United States, have all been broken. That's what he would say. And the truth is, both sides are probably telling the truth. That I don't think Putin's some great guy that's like a noble guy, and the West are a bunch of evil shits. They're both engaged in a power struggle. That's what's going on. The U.S. saw the declining of the Soviet Union and Russia. They aggressed. NATO aggressed. That's what they did. Russia sees an opportunity with a weak president and the United States declining as the global hegemon. They aggressed. That's what's going on. The best possible outcome is to try to have a peaceful resolution to stop this, and just saying, yeah, but inevitably one side might violate the peace agreement. That's true. But then the problem you have is that doesn't help you either, because then that means the only possible way to end this is the complete annihilation of Russia. Because you would say
No. We already discussed. We already discussed that. We already discussed kicking Russia out of Ukraine and join Ukraine NATO, so it's the biggest deterrent for Russia to attack.
Okay, we'll see. We'll see if it ends that way. I bet it doesn't. And I bet what that would do is further put Russia, even if it took a decade, Russia is then going to be driven into the arms of other countries like China, and eventually they're going to say that's not acceptable. NATO pushing in further, expanding west or expanding east is not going to be acceptable. And it wouldn't be to the United States. If you want to just make the argument, we think the United States and NATO is stronger than Russia, so fuck it, kick in the doors and do what you want. That's fine. I disagree with that argument, but at least it's sort of a sensible argument. It's a defensible argument. I don't understand what people are trying to say here that they want done, though. Just put, magically, if all of a sudden Ukraine's in NATO, now all the reasons, you were very articulate in outlining the reasons why Russia really wanted to invade NATO, because of the geography, because of the resource, all of a sudden they won't want that? So what they'll see is it requires that NATO keep its strength up as a military alliance. They have to be spread out there as well. It's a terrible idea. It makes the possibility, pushing NATO, like the argument is, Russia aggressing, I see someone in the chat saying this, if Russia gets closer to NATO countries, well, it makes the risk of nuclear escalation that much higher. So your solution is to push NATO closer to Russia? As if that doesn't push the risk of escalation? It makes no sense. If your argument is, well, if they hold on to parts of Ukraine and they would be allowed to keep the Donbass or Crimea, I'll be honest, I don't fucking know these regions, so I'm not even going to pretend I do. But whatever concessions they would want to keep parts of Ukraine, if you're like, oh, they can't do that because then eventually they might go to the next area, there's no reason that wouldn't be true now. Like,
but that's exactly why it wasn't true before. They already had Crimea, they already had Eastern Ukraine, and 8 years later they decided that they want to conquer the whole Ukraine.
I say,
and that's how this second phase of the war started. Trying to negotiate and trying to agree and trying to put peace, and then in 3 years, same thing will continue.
I could say the exact same thing. It's funny how you could do this. You could say things happened the way they did, and therefore we see Russia invaded, and then we see Russia's in the position they're in now vis-a-vis Ukraine, as far as a stalemate or Ukraine not clearly winning or whatever. And you're like, that's because things happened the way they did. And if we would have sent more weapons early, or if we would have went to war earlier, it would have prevented this. I can make the same argument. I could say, well, if the United States hadn't been, and NATO hadn't been aggressing towards NATO, or towards Russia, if they weren't with these bio bases, if they weren't doing things like bombing Libya, if they weren't doing things like bombing Assad, then we would have never got into this position. You probably, back when NATO was aggressing in those sorts of ways, you probably weren't saying, well, this is a bad idea. I was doing debates where, for example, there's a guy by the name of Dylan Burns, who's a streamer.
I listen to him all the time.
Well, that explains a lot. I was debating Dylan Burns way back with the Assad bombings. Dylan said that the worst political thing he had ever seen was Trump trying to pull out of Syria. That's worse than the Iraq war. It is more of a sin, said Dylan Burns, to pull out of a country than to unjustly bomb them. To unjustly bomb civilians in a country is less of a sin than pulling out of Syria. Because the argument was, this is the NATO alliance we're in, right? You tell me if this makes sense to you. We have to stay perpetually in Syria. This is the official talking points of our administration and the generals in the past administration. So much so that, by the way, brief side note, they lied to Trump. When Trump, who is the executive and has the authority to do such, tried to pull the troops out of Syria, they lied to keep troops there. And the reason was, we have to keep troops in Syria because if we leave, our NATO ally Turkey, that we station nuclear weapons in, will commit genocide against our ally, the Kurds. So we're in a military alliance with genocidal maniacs, and we've given those genocidal maniacs nuclear weapons, and now we have to violate the sovereignty of another country, Syria, because if we leave, our allies in NATO will commit genocide in our non-NATO ally populations. And as I'm talking to Dylan about this, and we're talking about, well, what the fuck's the U.S. doing there? Supposedly we're there to fight ISIS, but Assad's also fighting ISIS, but we take it upon ourselves to also bomb Assad and attack Assad installations, and we're going back and forth about why that's a good idea. And I said to him, don't you think this could piss off Russia? And he's like, that's okay, who cares, what will they do? Now what's he saying? Is that what he's saying about Russia now? So I've been saying for years and years that the idea of U.S. and NATO military expansion and fucking around in all these countries and bombing countries and regime change and all this bullshit, where we're told, just like we're told we have to fund both sides of it now. The Kurds are our allies, but the Turks are our allies, so we have to perpetually stay in Syria and violate their sovereignty. It's all bullshit. It is ran by people that are incompetent and corrupt. They're not doing it because they have the interest of the Syrian people or the Kurds or the Turks or the Ukrainians. They don't give a fuck. And I'm sick and tired of our people suffering. It's not the only people that are suffering are the people of Ukraine and the people of the United States that are funding this. That's it. The people that are benefiting.
People of Ukraine, people of Russia, yeah. Regular people are suffering. I absolutely agree. And that's awful. However, the solution that sounds like a good idea. I don't know how good of an idea it is. We'll see.
Let me ask you this question before I let you go. And you can stay on if you want, by the way, but it sounded like you were wrapping up there. Let me ask you this.
So Casimir, whoever that is in the waiting room, and they're saying that he wants to join. And
here's why I hesitate to do that. Because then it'll be like a 2-on-1 against you, and I don't want that to happen.
Okay, so just one thing. Ask whatever you want to ask.
Okay, real quick, I'll just say this. Do you think the calculus would be different if Ukraine was not our ally, or not a neutral country, but was a country that was fucking with us?
In Ukraine?
Yes.
I doubt. I think Russia was planning to attack.
No, I don't. Let me be clear. I don't mean that. I mean, would the U.S.'s obligation to Ukraine different if Ukraine was screwing with it? For example, let's say Russia invaded North Korea, right? North Korea is not our ally, right? Would the U.S. obligation to help North Korea be different because they're not our ally, so fuck them?
I mean, if you're playing the world police, it's probably good to keep all the countries in check, not just the ones that you have allies with. And unfortunately, looks like the only deterrent right now, there are two deterrents that exist in the world: NATO and nuclear weapons. There are no other deterrents, so technically anybody can invade anybody, and the way it's looking, the whole world just would sit and watch and would not do much to stop that. And that is extremely concerning and disturbing, that what happened with Georgia, and as I said, Ukraine is not the first country that Russia occupied. What happened in Georgia before that in 2008, and what happened in Ukraine, like the whole world is just sitting and watching, and they're like, all right, we don't want to deal with Russia. We'd much rather trade with them and make money instead of trying to deal with the situation. And
okay, I'm going to cut you off here. I think it's absolutely insane that you would suggest sending advanced technological weapons to the government of North Korea because they have a conflict with Russia. If you can't see the predictable outcome of that those weapons will eventually be used by North Korea for nefarious purposes or purposes antithetical to the interests of the United States.
I didn't suggest any of that. What I said, if U.S. is playing world police, then probably sending guns is not what you do.
Okay.
Then you bring the army. No, then you bring the army. That's what you do.
So wait,
and you make sure that things like that don't happen.
I mean, that's insane. So now you're saying if Russia would invade...
Hold on.
Wait, let me finish. Let me clarify. You're saying that if Russia invades a country that's hostile to the United States, that the United States military should go in and fuck both of them up?
I don't know about fucking both of them up, but if any country in the world would know that if they are to occupy another country, US will come in and fix the situation, let's just say, use that word, like when, let's say, Iraq occupied Kuwait. Like, US didn't go to Iraq just because US felt like it, right?
No, that's exactly why they went, because they saw personal financial
Hold on,
benefit.
hold on. Didn't Iraq occupy Kuwait?
Yes, but the problem...
Okay, so let's
Go
stop
ahead,
here.
you can go in your spiel, and then
okay.
I'll quickly nip this in the bud, but go ahead.
Yeah, you can nip it in the bud. But that is, at least that could be a valid reason, right? One country occupied another country,
That's not the
and
motive.
US went
That's
in
not
and,
the
and
motive.
fixed the situation.
That's not the motive. They wanted to go in, and then they found an excuse. There are literally dozens of times a year when countries or groups within one country invade or attack groups or countries elsewhere. And the United States and NATO seems to be very selective in when they go in. And I don't think you could argue this point, because you already admitted that it's not that they're doing it for moral reasons. It's not that they're doing it because they're benevolent. They're doing it because the times they do it, they see personal benefit to themselves. So the argument that you seem to be saying, well, anytime one country invades another, the United States needs to be there to stop it. Therefore, if Russia would invade China, or Russia would invade North Korea, or any other country you consider hostile to us, the United States should send their military there. Talk about the meat grinder. Can you imagine being a Marine sent into North Korea to fight the Russians with the North Koreans that also hate you, shooting you in the back? What a fucking insane...
But don't you think that would be the biggest deterrent for any country to attack any other country?
No, it wouldn't, because the U.S. no longer has the capability to be the world police on that scale. And even still, what that would give you an incentive is to become allies with the United States, or at least the people running the United States. That way you could attack with impunity. That's what the lesson would be learned. The lesson would be, now, if it was that the people running the show were competent and benevolent, and they were literally like, we're not taking sides in anything, we are literally just, anybody punches anyone, we punch back, maybe the calculus would be different. I still wouldn't want that. That's not a situation I would want. But at least it would be more defensible than admitting that these people only intervene when it personally benefits them. The reason I bring this whole thing up is, do you mind indulging me a little sidetrack here for a second? We'll see what you think about it. Who did you vote for in 2016? Or even if you didn't vote, who did you prefer?
I'm a Republican.
So you voted for Trump?
So I always vote Republican.
You voted for Trump in 2016?
Yes.
You know, Ukraine actually interfered to help Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, I know.
So why the fuck should I, as a Trump supporter, who saw our entire military-industrial complex and intel agencies attack him, why should I give a shit that a country of Ukraine, whose leadership literally interfered in our 2016 election, working with our intel agencies, why should I now say, well, let's benefit the intel agencies by helping Ukraine now?
Because you made the promise when you signed Budapest Memorandum.
They should have, there was an implied promise for them not to try to steal our elections and interfere. If I promise to look out for your house, and then you burn down my house, you don't get to say, but still you have to protect my house. You promised.
I don't know. I don't know whether the promises were made, which is possible. As I said, I don't know all the details on everything. But interfering in election in terms of saying or doing something little and taking nuclear weapons away, kind of a little bit different scales, don't you think?
Well, it depends. I mean, I guess you could say it's a different scale, but does it cause a threshold, right? Because one, we're saying take away nuclear weapons. That is an act that we would do, right? Interfering in an election is an act that they do. So in other words, like, if I give a homeless person money, that's an act I'm doing. That money might be responsible for him literally eating every day. And you would admit that's a very high thing. It might only be $10 to me, but to him, it's his meal every day, and he could quickly starve to death if he doesn't get it. But if he robs my house and he steals $15 worth of shit, you would still say, but Rob, you promised you would give him $10, and isn't that more important, him not starving to death, than the measly $15 he took from your house? Yes, for him it's more important, but I don't give a fuck, because he's the one who engaged in immoral behavior in attacking me. And so now it doesn't matter if what I promised him was worth more than what he did to me. It doesn't matter. He shouldn't have did it to me. Similarly, they jailed and then led to the death of an American citizen named Gonzalo Lira. Why should we send them any money given that? They had every opportunity to release him. He was trying to flee the country. They could have kicked him on the butt on the way out and said, don't come back. But instead, for free speech, for criticizing Ukraine, they jailed him, which led to his death. Why should we send him money?
I believe he was more than just criticizing Ukraine.
That's not what their indicting documents said. The indicting documents charged him with two things. They said, one, he was denying Russian war crimes, and the second was insulting Ukrainian troops. That's it. That's what the indictment said.
Probably what the documents say, but people who listen to him, he's saying a lot more than that. I haven't listened to him many times. I think I heard him once or twice, and I guess...
Well, nonetheless, but you would say in a democratic country, a second world or first world country, that we should go by their charging documents. For example, in the United States, we wouldn't accept this, saying, oh, someone was charged with tax fraud, and so we executed them. And then me as a defense saying, yeah, but he said a lot of other bad shit too. It wasn't just tax fraud. You would say, yeah, but that's not what the government charged him with. The government charged him with tax fraud, so you don't get to execute the dude. Similarly, I think we should go not by what innuendo is of a bunch of people that hated him. I'm not saying he was a good guy. I'm not saying he was a journalist. I barely know him. All I see is a bunch of rumors about what a nasty man he was and things that he said, and he was a spy for Russia and all this shit, and yet not in the indicting document. The indicting document, and I've asked Andy, because one of the problems is I don't speak the language, so I'm relying on a translation. But I've had several people look at it and say the translation's accurate, and from what I see, the indicting document only makes two claims. That he denied Russian war crimes, which our country would say, First Amendment, you have the right to do, and that he insulted Ukrainian troops. Our country would say is the right to do. Therefore, as an American, he should not have been jailed. He should have been deported, preferably to America. And when our ally that's depending on our generosity for their continued survival leads to the death in prison of one of our citizens, I say fuck him. Maybe if Zelensky and the people responsible resign in shame and face the punishment that should be meted out by people in the United States for that, maybe then we could have a conversation about resending that aid.
I agree that he should have been deported. I don't remember how he died. I just saw the news that he died, but
they said pneumonia in prison is what they said.
I mean, Ukrainian prisons, I guess it's possible. Any case,
this is the whole problem. Like, when you factor all of these things in, it just... The other thing is, you have to understand that practically... Would you agree with this? The United States is declining as the world hegemon.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, then we can't say that perpetually going forward that we're still going to have this system where the United States is the world police. I mean, it is conceivable in the next 30 years that the BRICS countries, that you could have an alliance of Russia, China, India, countries like that arguably could at least be close enough to the United States that it would be competitive militaristically.
I absolutely agree with you, and I absolutely agree that probably U.S. should not step away from being the world police, but probably U.S. should honor the agreements that were made prior.
Okay, I will... So here's what I'm going to do. Webmaster, if you want to stick around, you can, and I'll bring Casimir in, and I'll shut up, except in the role of a pseudo-moderator to move the conversation on, but I'm not going to, like, 2-on-1 or anything like that. If you don't want to stick around, that's absolutely fine. I'll just bring Casimir on, but it's totally your call.
I actually do have to go.
Okay.
And this was my first time ever on Twitch, debating
I enjoyed the conversation. I thought it was a great conversation. And you're already worlds above people because you have a mic that's legible. So many people, it's their first time, they got you could barely understand them. So, yeah.
I play games, so I talk to people online. But thank you very much for talking to me, and I listen to you sometimes. I have to step away if I am back and Casimir is still here and he wants to talk to me. I'll talk to him, but I listen and I'll be around.
All right, thanks, man. Have a good one.
Thank you. All right.
All right, let's move Casimir on. What's up, Kaz? Can you hear me? He might have walked away.
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes. How's it going, sir? How have you been?
Is any distortion?
No. You sound good.
Excellent. Okay.
So
well, I have to commend the guy for coming out and speaking, and he does sound okay.
Yeah.
He has a good, he's at least excellent voice,
and he's formulating at least cogent arguments. Half the people I talk to online, the bar is so low now for talking to randos online. It's like, oh, a sentence. That's good. I can tell where one sentence ends and another begins. But yeah, I mean, my problem with this whole situation is it's very similar to Israel Palestine, which is, I know there's an extended history. I know it's very complicated. I know that both sides are going to have their version of the history. I know that one side's going to be more correct than the other. I just don't give a shit because my answer is very simple. We shouldn't be involved. And so I see enough problems. I work 90 hours a week. I focus on a bunch of other things that I'm more interested in. But I know this. The people that come on here and definitively say, like, no, this is exactly it. One side's always the boogeyman. They did, and the other side's right. I know it's bullshit. You know, so I can't go back to know the specifics of the Budapest Memorandum or the Minsk Accords or whatever the fuck they are. I know that's probably stuff that you've looked into more. But I know that what he's saying is just not true, that it's that clear-cut. Russia's just the aggressors and Ukraine never did anything.
No, it is... Here's the problem. It's... What he's saying is clear-cut and is mostly true, but what he's omitting is the issue.
Right.
So a very big part of the boomer truth mentality, which is what I believe he represents, even though he's not a boomer, is this idea that they do say true things, you know, Nazis were evil. That's true, right? You know, the USSR fought on the Allies' side. That's also true. But there's some, you know, nuance that's missing. For example, Tucker Carlson interviews Putin, and Putin says, you know, some things about Hitler and Germany and Ukrainian Nazis, okay? And all of that is, like, you know, obviously true. But what does Putin omit? Because he doesn't want to say it. He omits the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the fact that Russia was supplying the Nazis with most of their fuel, with much of their ammunition and their gas and other resources, as they were invading, you know, Poland, France, and the rest of Europe, up until, you know, it only stopped in 1941. So for 2 years straight, it was the USSR plus Germany against the rest of the world, and then something else happened. So you omit that entire piece of history, and then you have your boomer truth, where you can sort of say, you know, Uncle Joseph.
Right.
But so, going back to this conflict, I agree with you. My general stance is that these are all gangs. We have our own gang to deal with, and our gang should definitely not be involved in gang fights of other gangs, unless it's, you know. And then we go to this next level of argument. Well, before we have glorious, you know, liberal ANCAP or whatever you're going for, we have the current situation. So the current thing, you know, the current government, and we now must stop, you know, China and Russia from taking too much of the world. Okay, let's buy that argument and argue from their perspective, because that's what I believe you mostly have to do. Right. You have to, like, see, well, not only is it inconsistent from some libertarian perspective or from American nationalist perspective, it's even inconsistent from their perspective.
Correct.
Because what they're saying is not what's actually going on. And how do we know that? Because here's some details he's omitting. So when did the current phase of the war start? And he would tell you, you know, he probably remembers the date, sometime in February 2022, right. Russia invaded Ukraine. Well, no, that's not where a war starts. A war starts when one of the countries mobilizes for a war. Right. And that happened. Ukraine obviously mobilized first because it believed that that the special forces that were taking out governments in Donbass were usurpation, so it sent military to fight against them. And so sort of both sides, or maybe Ukraine or maybe Russia first, doesn't matter. But in this most recent conflict, Russia did start escalating. When? As far as I remember, it was either in 2019 or 2018. I think it was 2019, before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Why did Russia start escalating? How did it escalate? It escalated by doing, like, paratrooper drops and military exercises near Ukraine's border. Like, he did, like, what we call saber rattling, right? Mm-hmm. What was the trigger event? Well, the trigger event, if you look at Ukraine's history, was Putin has some allies in Ukraine. These are oligarchs who, through privatization, meaning through legal means that were legal at the time, I guess, maybe they're not fair, but they acquired property meaning the oil corporations, some of them, and they own one of the pipelines that goes through Ukraine. And they own like a variety of oil concessions for oil development. And one of these corporations was taken over by the Ukrainian government under Zelensky. Now, Putin provided the world clear evidence that this is, quote unquote, his company. How did he do that? Well, he is the godfather of the daughter of that oligarch. He's inviting him to his yachts. He's openly showing to the world, this guy is my guy. He's part of my mafia organization. So don't touch him. And so what do? They accuse the guy of treason. They take his wife and daughter hostage. And they force him to give up all of his companies. And then I think they eventually released him to Russia, or he's still in prison. I don't know. What the response from the Putin regime, from the other mobster, is to show force right on your border and say, we're going to invade you now if you don't, restore order. That was the final provocation. Now, does that justify Russia bombing any civilians or like invading a country? Obviously not.
Right.
But why is he omitting this fact?
Well, here's the thing, right? Everyone wants to make this clear cut. And this is true in everything, right? It's true. I spend a lot of time arguing sort of normative politics. And one of the things that aggravates me is so many people are unwilling to call out when something is done that's not good on their side. Now, I also hate the both sides do it argument. That's the dumbest, lowest IQ argument. But there is truth that you have to be willing to try to give a full picture to analyze these things. Now, I think the burden is on the people that want to send weapons that will, A, end up costing the average American, blue-collar Americans, poor Americans. They're the ones that are going to pay the price for this and foot the bill at the end of the day. B, that predictably will lead to the prolonging of a war. And C, the weapons directly will kill people. So the burden is on those people advocating for that position to give a truthful reason, a declaration of the situation on the ground, and why these sort of interventions are good. And they can't do it. And they also need to be able to give a clear-cut example of what we think this will do, how it will lead to the escalation ceasing. They can't do it. There's
another problem. So let's take it further. We'll ignore all the provocations. We'll just look at his worldview, and we agree. Let's say hypothetically we agree to send that the military solution is the correct one, and in fact we want Ukraine to defeat Russia. How would the U.S. government behave if it wanted to seriously defeat Russia?
Right.
What would it have to do? Well, one of the things it would have to do is to look at the battlefield, look at what works and what doesn't work, and adapt. And here is what it found out very quickly. It found out that tanks do not work, that large military movements don't work, and this is because there is a dominance of surveillance. Mm-hmm. Unless you're moving through the forest, where you get partial concealment from detection if you move in small enough groups, unless you do small groups through the forest, you're going to get detected. And when you get detected, it's going to be an artillery battle.
Right.
Who has more artillery? Russia does. Therefore, Russia is going to have more wins, less losses in the prolonged war where artillery matters. Now, the other thing that was discovered in the war early on, he said something that was very boomer, unfortunately, which is Ukrainians took up arms and managed to stall Russia. That's not true. I mean, they did take up arms, but what stalled Russia was the same thing that stalled Armenia and many other countries in the world that ignored the importance of drones. It was the Turkish drones that Ukraine prepared, and it was all the Javelin missiles that America prepared. That allowed Ukraine. It wasn't a local guy with a Kalashnikov who was killing Russians.
Right.
It was the artillery. It was the SAM sites. It was all of the things that are very static, or that allow small units to basically guerrilla warfare against an invading force, which was again it was specifically at a type of weaponry, but then the situation changes, and here's what we're doing. So here's the argument that I hear from Ukrainians, which is correct argument. it doesn't it initially didn't actually cost the USA like billions of dollars to help Ukraine, because what the USA did is all the expiring weaponry from like the warehouses, all the javelins that are about to expire, they went to Ukraine. All the tanks that are about to expire that belong to the graveyard, that are not modernized, most of those are the tanks that are being sent to Ukraine. That's the argument, allegedly.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, javelins are good. I don't, if you're from that perspective, that's a good investment. But why are we sending tanks?
Right.
Why are we sending expensive long-range missiles? Like LRM launchers are designed to like shoot 300 miles behind enemy lines. We are not allowing Ukraine, our government is not allowing Ukraine to have those weapons because they would start shooting at Russian cities and it would, result in a nuclear war, most likely. So they're giving them like a limited version of that. But what's very obvious, if you look at it, is that we're giving them the stuff that we produce. We just happen to produce. So if it's produced somewhere in the United States already, that's what they're getting. It's not an attitude of winning. You don't optimize for maximum local welfare,
right?
The military corporate welfare to win a war. You say, listen, we fought for a year. Russians are showing us that Iranian micro drones are destroying our tanks and are destroying troops. Iranian drones are so cheap that they're cheaper than training an expert special ops soldier. Therefore, when a special ops unit gets detected on the battlefield, it starts getting targeted individually by Iranian drones.
Mm-hmm.
You see the footage; it's like horrifying. Yep. The guy is running away from a drone, and it has the time to chase him, and then they send another one if the first one doesn't kill him, because it's like so cost effective. Now, America has massive amount of potential factories that could produce this on order, that produce drone parts, and they could be like in the COVID times, reorganized towards military production to help Ukraine. Why does that not happen?
Because it's not profitable to the people that they want to be profitable.
Yes, exactly. It's not profitable to Boeing or to Lockheed Martin or to Raytheon.
And that's exactly what my contention's been, that there is an incentive not for Ukrainian victory, but an incentive for the prolonging of the war, for the continual amount of funds to be sent. Because who's happy with this? Raytheon, Boeing, right? They're happy with this. They want it to drag out. And this is one of the things, this sort of cognitive dissonance for the person I was talking to. Imagine conceding that the people running the show, our politicians, our intel communities, are bad people, and they don't give a shit about the people of Ukraine, which he concedes, right? But still trusting them with providing these munitions in hopes that it will lead to the maximum outcome. It is clear to me that the predictable outcome is they want Ukraine to be a meat grinder, and that the people that will suffer the most at the end of the day, once it's no longer profitable, which was what I was setting up at the end there, once it's no longer profitable, they're going to say, that's it, we're done. We'll go on to the next conflict. We'll go on to the next area. And we'll be in the exact same position that we were in 2022, where after the initial push of Ukraine or of Russia, and there was sort of an initial stalemate, which I agree, I think, at least in my expectations as a complete novice, I was surprised at how effective it seemed Ukraine was in that initial push. That, to me, was the optimal time to try to broker a peaceful negotiation. And yes, Ukraine still would have been negotiating from a position of weakness, but still, it would have saved the lives of countless Russian and Ukrainians, which I care about both of those. Instead, we've now left it into the hands of people in NATO, in military-industrial complex in the United States, that have no incentive of having this end anytime soon. Yeah. Even with the Ukrainian victory. They don't want an immediate Ukrainian victory. Here's the problem.
The cope that we always hear is that, well, that's our last resort. Really, we have no other choice. Because this evildoer guy, he's always going to attack his neighbors. And, he will eventually go, which was the highlight of that stream, he will eventually demand Alaska. Now, the reason why he can say that to any audience about Alaska, the Alaska point, is because this conversation occurs in a vacuum where nobody looks at the map. So if you look at the map, and there are videos on YouTube that look at the map. Like there's a good one by actually an anti-Russian propagandist, but he still made a video called he has like a little windmill as a symbol. And the guy made a video that says, why did Russia attack Ukraine? And he lays it out like very openly, all the reasons that are not related to anything Putin says, but are related to facts on the ground. How does he do that? He looks at the geography. So there's the Eurasian basin, or like the
Peter
the
Zayan.
plains.
That's who it is.
Yeah, probably.
Yep, I know you're.
And like he has that brilliant video. He shows you the map. This is the map. This is how it looks from Moscow's perspective. It looks like we're on a big plains up until the Ural Mountains are blocking sort of like our classical retreat point. But all the industry is there on the European side, and this is like a plain that's open. If you try to attack that plain through Norway, through Finland, it's very obvious, and and they have a strong navy there, and it's just not a good approach because it's not good terrain to attack most of the year. If you try to attack from Georgia, then Russia has, one of the reasons why the war started in South Ossetia, because Russia now controls the mountain pass. So it's impossible to attack through Georgia, even if Georgia were to join NATO, which was, again, why did Georgia was so important? Because it's on one of the entrances. And if you look at what is Russia invading, it's invading the entrances to that plain.
Right.
Now, is it like fair for Putin to want to control those? Obviously not. There are like local people there who want to tell him, fuck off, you big bully, and, piss off, you mobster. We don't want to live under your mob empire. But at least to recognize that this is his interest. He's not like he's assembling the USSR. The question is, why did the USSR exist? Because Russian Empire existed. Why did the Russian Empire exist? Because Europeans kept attacking. Because Europe was like a collection of empires. That the only way you stop Russia from being attacked by Europe is you control the choke point.
Yeah, and so I've seen this. It's Peter Zayan. Now, Zayan, I think that's probably the guy you're talking about. Very smart-sounding dude, right? And he definitely is on the payroll of the U.S. intel companies, right? One of the things he said, just a brief aside here, he predicted in a speech he did in Shreveport, Louisiana, probably the very one you're talking about, because I was interested in this map as well. He predicted that the way that Ukraine would seek to end this conflict was to cause a mass casualty event in Russia. And he said the way to do that was to blow up this dam in the south, which was basically responsible for irrigation of like 80% of the crops that Russia uses to feed their people. And wouldn't you know it, that dam blew up. But do you know what Peter Zayan said? Oh, it was the Russians. That's what he said. Yeah. So he literally says, if Ukraine's going to have to try to win, they'll blow up this dam. Then the dam blows up, and Zayan says, well, it wasn't Ukrainians, it was Russians, because it's basically a war.
He's one of the sources.
Oh, of course.
But
I just...
quoting him like real life war is the guy I'm talking about.
Okay. But I was just bringing him up. But when I watched, that's who I saw talk about this, Peter Zayan. When I watched, right, this is the point that he never gets around saying, because he clearly doesn't like Russian Putin. I don't like Russian Putin, so don't get me wrong, right? But he's outlining exactly what you are. He's like, look, the problem is when you look at sort of the topography of Russia and their arable land and where they can grow crops and all this stuff, they need these choke points. This is necessary for, their continued existence. The question is why? Why would they feel it's necessary to militaristically control those points? Well, the reason that because if you could see into a crystal ball and the world's super hippie utopia and Ukraine and all the surrounding countries are like, yeah, man, by all means, use these, no problem at all, man. We'll share the good fortune. We'll share these passes. Then there would be no need to invade. The reason that they feel they need to militaristically control those points is because they see that as they weaken, which Russia is weakening, as they weaken, they see that increased NATO aggression will eventually make them totally reliant on a military alliance that's reason for existence is the destruction of them. And they can't accept that. They're like, no. Now, like you said, that doesn't mean they're justified in invading. That I'm not saying that. But if you say, as people that are smart and talk about this, look, it has to do with the geography. The reason Ukraine's so important to them is because of these certain areas of egress that they need for trade and for crops and all of this. You have to ask yourself, why would they feel threatened? Why do they feel they need to do this now?
Yeah,
What
so
Zayan says, I'll just finish real quick, then I'll let you jump in.
Yeah.
Zayan talks a lot about demographics. So he talks, for example, about an aging population in China and Russia, right? And again, I'm not saying you have to agree with this or that Zayan's right. He has an agenda too. But I'm using Zayan's own logic to say, okay, well then how does this make sense in your world? What he says is, this is basically a last-ditch effort from Russia because they won't have young people necessary to have some sort of military effort like this 20 years from now. So they feel like it's now or never. We have to dig in, hold these places. But why would they feel it necessary? Because they know the truth, that as they wane in power, the West will encircle them. They will take what's theirs. That's true. That doesn't mean Russia's justified, but that's how Russia's looking at it. And they could look at the map and say, look what's happened. Look at the eastward expansion of NATO. Look at what they've done over and over. And I think when you hear Putin, and again, I don't take everything Putin says at face value, but when you hear him in that interview with Tucker, and he's probably telling the truth, that he's basically like, I had good relationships with the U.S. presidents, right? Like, I would be like, hey, let's try to come to some agreement.
Well, let's talk about this. Let's get in on this. So this is the problem. He presents Putin as somebody who has nothing to lose by attacking, and sort of it's halfway true because he's not really as affected by sanctions as they hoped, primarily because Iran and China and India covertly and Brazil covertly did not allow that to happen. BRICS simply will not allow the R in BRICS to fall, and so they will covertly, like India is supporting Russia by purchasing oil and other products and not closing trade. China is obviously supporting with electronics, and like by being a completely masked. Russia can buy anything through China, and you cannot track it. And Iran is just openly supplying Iranian arms manufacturing, and keeps advancing on the battlefield. We're actually giving Iran a huge sort of advantage in this war because they're getting oil money. And in return, they're getting to optimize their military by targeting the U.S. military or like U.S. proxies in Ukraine. So they're advancing really rapidly. But what do they have to lose? Well, actually a lot. For example, we used to hold their oil pipelines hostage. Right. That was one of the reasons why he wanted Crimea, because he has the southern oil pipeline and he needs the fleet to defend the oil. He needs the fleet to be able to patrol the Black Sea. And if you tell him, your lease on Sevastopol is going to expire and we're going to join NATO, and then there's going to be a NATO Navy there. So now there's a NATO Navy in the north controlling Russian pipelines, and we saw what happened to those. And now there's like a Russian Navy in the south, and you're going to remove that. Then they're going to control all the oil pipelines that Russia has that go towards the west, and gas. So that's one of the reasons. That's definitely a threat, a leverage that they used to have, and now they're losing. The other leverage is what the Russian opposition was complaining for decades. The sons and daughters of oligarchs are owning corporations and are owning businesses and are owning property all over the West. From Florida to New York, there's a son of an oligarch who's living in New York and somewhere in Brooklyn in an expensive apartment, participating in web startups. There's another one in Florida. There's the south of France is owned. Many of the things that are put up for sale are being bought by Russian oligarchs. All of that was open, and it was just very recently closed halfway after the war began. But before the war began, you had all of that leverage. The sons and daughters of Putin himself live in the West. So is he like absolutely open to being sanctioned and to being forced to stay inside, like as a, in this like sort of cage in Russia where he can't visit Davos anymore? That had some value to him, and even though, like, and again, these are thugs and murderers, but he wanted to be in the club of like the official recognized thugs and murderers.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I believe Putin when he says, look, it's funny because Roman in the chat saying like, well, they could have just chilled the fuck out. I think that's what they wanted. I think Putin wanted to be in the big club. I think he probably was talking to Bush and Obama, and I think Bush and Obama would have probably reacted in sort of the ways he's saying. It has a ring of truth to it, where he's basically like, without saying it, this is what he basically means. Hey man, I want to be in your club. I want to get rich. I want my corrupt fucking people to get rich. Let's do this shit. Like, let us join NATO. We'll all be in it, right? Like, and NATO, or Bush and Obama are like, it sounds reasonable. Let me go back and talk to my people. And then his people are like, no.
And the reason why they say no is because the CIA and all the other sort of agencies, their bread and butter for decades has been attacking the USSR.
Correct.
Which was like good on them. They helped the USSR collapse, good. But what really collapsed the USSR was the economics and the oil market collapsing from much increased production. But this is important. They need to get paid, and their payday is, doing lots of minor annoying stuff against Russia. And Russia's payday for their agencies is doing the same in the West. It's like, messing stuff up for the West, stopping a color revolution here and there or enabling it. And they're both, so the Cold War never really stopped. It just became a little bit more one-sided for a while in the 90s and early 2000s before Russia regained a lot of, attitude. So they found that, for example, now in Russia and China have more influence in Africa than the United States. And Africa is the future continent in terms of population growth and resources that are untapped.
Hey, let me cut you off real quick because I've seen some people came in. I'm going to be on Tim Pool's Culture War podcast this Friday, I think at 10 a.m. It won't be broadcast on my show. It'll be on Tim's show, but I'll be there in person. So I just wanted to throw that in there. But yeah, back to this case. Right. And when you think, I don't disagree with you. I think there is my guess is the intel agencies of Russia and the United States have a mutually beneficial agreement of this like long-standing game that they both justify each other by the other existing. Like that seems to happen a lot in like sort of these political circles. But think about it from this perspective too. Like, so obviously we can go back to 2013 with Crimea, all of that stuff. But look at the 2016 election. So if you're Putin and you're looking at the actions of the United States there hasn't been that much anti-Russia hysteria since the height of the Cold War, where they were literally, we had Democratic senators going on television saying it was an act of war that Russians spent $50,000 on Pokemon Go and Facebook ads. An act of war, they called it. For 4 years, from 2016 to 2020, all we heard was the evils of Russia. Trump was in bed with... So if you're Russia and you're thinking about these things like the pipeline that you're talking about, and you're like, look, eventually our lease is up, and the same unhinged fucking lunatics that's literally painting us as Lord Voldemort, we're going to have to rely on them to have some sort of sensible economic agreement, where we could both make money. We don't see it happening. It's clear that they're ramping up, right? They're ramping up publicly, and that's going to lead to...
There are many of these symbols. It's like, if you look at an action, and I think I started in chat, I said Yugoslavia. It's really important to look at Yugoslavia, because here was the breakdown of Yugoslavia, very basically. These are two genocidal groups. One of them is Christian, one of them is Muslim. Now, Europe is supposed to represent the Christians, supposedly. Right? But the Christians were allied with Russia, historically. And to spite Russia, the United States picked specifically the Christians to be the bad guys in that scenario, even though it was a scenario with two very evil groups of people, murdering each other. So they converted one group into, they called them out for they are genociders. They completely whitewashed the other group as victims, which had horrible consequences for European history since then, because of who they were friend and enemy to. So they applied pure friend-enemy to a complex conflict.
Right.
And then what did they do? They bombed civilians. And I remember Russian propaganda in the 90s starting to say, NATO is an evil empire and NATO is bombing innocents, and how this is not justified, and they're specifically targeting not just the military, but they're sending missiles into public squares. They accidentally bomb the Chinese embassy and kill some people. They're not just slapping in the face of Russia in Europe, they're doing it to the Chinese mobsters as well. and this is 10 years before. This is like a few years before Putin gains power, and a few years before he starts cracking down. So there's like a period of time of 8 years, including the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan starting, where Putin gets to observe the West just doing whatever the hell they want in the world, and also openly attacking his allies everywhere. And then the color revolution starts, which happened to all target regimes that used to be friendly with Russia. So they look at all of this and they see, oh, there is a trajectory here. And then Ukrainian nationalists, after the events of 2013 and 2014, those guys are openly saying what they want in the world. They want to split Russia apart. So this is not just like going out and buying a gun, like in the analogy the guy was saying. Mm-hmm. This is buying a gun while talking about murdering your neighbor.
Right.
And murdering his neighbors and then planting your agents in nearby homes.
Another thing, I totally agree. And another thing, I think the catalyst for sort of the U.S. color revolution in 2013, 2014, I think it's understated how important that is. Now, when you say color revolution, everyone wants to go to just Victoria Nuland's phone call. And I understand the argument that that phone call itself doesn't technically show...
I was talking about the Arabs.
Right. But if you listen to Mike Benz talk about this, I don't know if you saw him on Tucker Carlson, where he was sort of goes through a history of the internet, right? And so just to give a really quick crash course, basically a lot of the technology we think of as the internet was developed with help of DARPA and other U.S. Weapons and intel agencies. And they saw free open internet as making their job easier because they were able to then allow the festering of communication in countries that we see as hostile to the United States, that instead of sending in people like they would do in the past, like, to talk to people on the ground, you could do it all virtually, you could do it all online, and it sort of has an exponential increase in the effectiveness of it because free speech online would be able to move so fast that a small spark can turn into a big flame. And that's kind of what I was trying to talk to Webmaster there about, was the idea that, yes, there are people that were legitimately pissed in Ukraine, no doubt. All of the regimes suck. I'm pissed in my country, right? So I get it. They're frustrated with their government, absolutely. But the United States, certainly through NGOs and other entities and free speech, and the internet, was helping direct that to the direction they wanted. And what Mike Benz says is this was a crucial moment because this is when the intel agencies realized that it also could be used against them. And so there was a bunch of people that were pro-Russia that used the same sort of free speech to advocate for sort of like a counterinsurgency to what they saw as sort of the revolution that was occurring.
Yes.
And that was basically the inciting incident where the intel agencies were like, oh shit, now we could see. And then that's followed up by basically Brexit and Trump. And so the intel agencies all of a sudden realize, oh shit, this tool that we use so effectively in countries all around the globe, now it's organically being used against us back home. Because it turns out people back home could also exercise free speech and realize that they don't think that we have their best interests. And so that's when they pivot. After 2016, where they're like, okay, we now have to rely on censorship. We have to censor disinformation. And the key tool they use is Russia, because they have to have a link from how do you get from the CIA operating with these tools, because they're supposed to operate on foreign issues, how do you censor domestic institutions, domestic people? And what they settled on was because it's Russian disinformation, because it's a foreign country attacking.
Yeah, but they had an even more brilliant solution according to Benz, which is they offloaded all of the censorship into quote-unquote allegedly private institutions that are totally government funded.
Right.
And that allowed them to have this loophole, which eventually will get shut down by the Supreme Court, a few decades in the future, possibly.
Yeah, then we'll just have AI to worry about. But yeah, I mean, it's absolutely... And so when you see how this is all connected, again, I go back to... my favorite politician ever was Ron Paul, right? And I remember Ron Paul getting shit on after 9/11, where he is a voice of clarity that's sort of condemning the Iraq war. He would later be vindicated. I mean, there were few and far between the amount.
Partly, there is a problem with Ron Paul, which is there is a balance, and the problem is that people go into one extreme or the other in terms of their analysis of these mobs. they say, well, listen, the chickens came home to roost for America in 9/11. We really deserve that stuff, it was coming. And it sometimes goes into this extreme that they believe we would not get attacked. But the reality is we got attacked, or the USA got attacked because it was weak.
Well, that's
it's not an actual. It's a giant that's made out of.
I agree and disagree. I think that over a period of time, indefinitely, you're going to see an attack. Like, that's true. But I think that we escalate and we provoke the specific attacks I think Ron Paul's analogy is correct. If you stick your foot into a den of vipers, you shouldn't be surprised when the viper bite. That doesn't mean you don't blame the viper. And that doesn't mean that a viper would have never found its way to you. But the truth is, we exacerbate the problem with our foreign policy. For example, you could go back to the overthrowing of the Shah and see domino effects that lead to, intel agencies have some sort of color revolution, fund some sort of rebels. 15 years later, we have to fight the rebels. We arm the Mujahideen. 25 years later, we have to go into Afghanistan. Then we have to go into Iraq. And so, there
are details in all of this. There are details lost. One of the details is that it is more understandable to do this as part of a Cold War, when the Soviet Union is doing the exact same thing. GRU, all of the people who are the granddaddies of Wagner, they existed in the Soviet Union, and they did all of the same stuff. And so it's sort of it's funny, the leftists will all call out, the U.S. helped overthrow the government of Allende in Chile and installed, that dictator. But how many, of these types of revolutions were committed by the USSR all over South America? So the Cold War existed. We can't abandon the existence of the other side.
And that's certainly true. I understand. But what I'm saying is, you have to be willing to look at things from the other side's perspective. That doesn't mean the other side is right. So the reason I bring up that Ron Paul situation is, if you are an Afghani farmer, right, and, I remember looking into this, and I had friends that were fighting in Afghanistan, and one of their jobs was to burn down the poppy fields. And so imagine how tragic it would be to be this Afghani farmer who's growing crops, and then a bunch of fucking crazed warlords come and they're like, you're not going to grow crops, you're going to grow poppy, or we're going to rape and murder your family, right? So you're like, shit, that these people are horrible, so you grow poppy. Then the United States comes in, and you're like, okay, and then they burn down your field. And now you're really fucked. You basically...
we gotta, the ends justify the means. We have to support Big Pharma.
Right. So anyways, what have you done? You've sort of turned someone that, if you would have handled it in a different way, that maybe would have been sympathetic towards you, to now, at best, they're like, well, you're an asshole too, right? And so what I'm saying is, it was predictable with the actions that were being taken by our foreign policy that were antagonistic towards Russia, that something would happen. That doesn't mean Russia's justified. I am not saying that. But what I'm saying is, it's not as simple as this narrative that people want to put out there that's like, Russia's just these, maniacal supervillains. That they're just,
there's a problem.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a problem with the Afghani narrative, and this is always, the case. This is the sort of the strangeness. The regime is powerful enough to invade and attack Afghanistan. Definitely is. It happened.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not powerful enough to do it like the Romans did,
right?
Or to do it like
exactly.
like Alexander Macedon did, or like any other invader. They don't have the stomach for the mass murder that's required to subjugate people. And so what happens is they try this combination, this very weird combination of showing up to Afghanistan and talking the language of equity, right? So the way you speak in Afghanistan, and this is something that is not translated, the way the USSR and Russia before that and other empires that actually sort of subjugated these regions, spoke to these regions, is through a language of mass murder. And historians will say that wasn't effective. No, it was effective while there was military capability to do so. It was very, very effective. That's the biggest lie. We had many histories of empires that persevered for a very long time, because they were genocidal empires
Right.
if you disobeyed them. The Mongol Empire was there for 100 years, much longer in terms of dominating certain areas. Why? Because you could either surrender and pay, your 10%, or you can kill their ambassador, and then every single male in the city would die.
Right.
Innocent, guilty or not. And that's how those empires, and the next city would be like, maybe we shouldn't kill their diplomat.
Right.
Maybe paying some taxes is
preferable.
Good,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
let those crazies, keep their steps. We don't care about them. That was the way things used to work. But now we have this weird combination of strength and weakness, which actually makes sense because they're not there to gain total control over oil. China is going to show them how to do that.
Right.
China is ruthless enough to achieve that. And China is not going to genocide people on its own. It's going to pay people to genocide people for them. That's how it operates everywhere.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
This is the funny part of our regime. It's on the one hand, it pretends to be, it pretends to be the Federation from Enterprise, right?
Mm-hmm.
From Star Trek, but it's not.
Right. I totally agree. Right. I do agree with that context of, I think that their actions, right? Like, you could go back and you could look. It's not as if those the people that were engaged in these great conquests in the past necessarily had the well-being of the people they were conquering, right? It was for their own personal benefit and glory. That's certainly true. But weirdly enough, one of the net results of that strength and that brutality was a lot of times it ended up benefiting after the initial invasion or overthrow, benefiting those people. The weakness, the going in, and then we're going to liberate these people, it almost always has the opposite effect. Like, look at Libya, right? We're going to go in, and it's because just like those past conquests, the people that are running these current conquests, they have no interest in those people either. It's just
it's the cultural. It's this deadly combination of globalism and cultural relativism. I mean, I would understand a globalist empire who would say, listen, our way of life is the best, so we're going to re-educate everybody in the world to our way of life. Now they're becoming that with the whole woke thing, but that doesn't have any legs because that thing is dysgenic, non-evolutionary. But they used to have that. The whole point of colonization was the fact that they would come to an area and implement a function that didn't exist there for 1,000 years, like railroads and governance and regional specialization and European style management. As they were quote unquote exploiting those people, if you look at the metrics, the quality of life of all the exploited people actually climbed up. Their markets opened up to real industrialization eventually down the line. And the requirement for that was sort of hubristic belief that the European point of view is just superior to everybody else. But now they're not. They don't have that component, and yet they're trying to play the same game. And the result is exactly like in Libya. They're deposing a dictator, and who are they going into Libya? And are they taking all the children from all the parents and putting everybody in re-education camps to convert them by force into European way of thinking? No, they're keeping them in the same mob mentality that they were born with their local religion, with religious fanatics that want to control the government, and it becomes a bloody civil war.
Yep.
And there's no solution there that existed there. They believe that everybody is a blank slate and you can just slap the word democracy in it and rainbows and unicorns will show up.
Yep.
But democracy was not effective, or in some places because it is effective. It was effective because the underlying culture was a high trust society already for certain economic and other reasons. And you can convert regions to that, but it takes converting the geography of them before the people convert to different cultures.
It takes and competency, right? And I don't think we have that. We're at the just go in and loot and not give a shit, but virtue signal that we're nice people stage. Casimir, yes. I hate to do it, but I got a text from work here. I got to do some work shit, so I'm gonna go. Could you shout yourself out and tell people where they can find you if you like? I don't know if you're streaming anymore or not.
No, I don't have the time. I work too much. Even this stream is probably taxing tomorrow morning. But I'm glad you pulled me up. It was very enjoyable. I'll shout out the Crucible, who wished you luck on Timpool. I wish you luck on Timpool as well. I hope you come dressed in your best so that you look amazing. And respect respect the beanie.
Yeah, I will. I definitely will. Now, I do appreciate it, and I appreciate the Crucible as well. I'm going to give them a shout out here before I go. But yeah, it's always great to talk to you, Casimir. We'll have to do it soon.
It was a pleasure. Take care.
Take it. Bye. Yeah, I do want to shout out the Crucible. Now, my understanding is I think Andrew is going to get an opportunity to go on Timple's show here in the near future as well. So that'll be cool. But yeah, it's really nice. Andrew had some kind things to say about me today, and I really appreciate it. Look, Andrew has been busting his ass. The guy regularly has on YouTube over 1,000 people watching his live streams. And I don't agree with everything that Andrew believes, obviously. However, it couldn't happen to a nicer guy. And one of the things I find unique about Andrew is he has this sort of approach to things where he's very aggressive. He comes off as very gruff. But ironically, he's one of the nicest people that would do anything for you. And it's almost the exact inversion of almost every streamer that you see. Most streamers put on this peachy, rosy face, and then they can't wait to stab you in the back. Andrew has done so much to help me behind the scenes, it's ridiculous. I still have a standing invitation anytime I want to use the Crucible's channel to do my show, The Arena, that I used to do there. I've just been very busy. So we're in talks, maybe bringing that show for like a once a month, maybe doing something like that. But no, incredibly generous of Andrew and everyone at the Crucible for giving me a shout out. I always appreciate it. I love going on the Crucible. Hopefully I'll get some more debates lined up on there. But I know Andrew has been so busy just blowing up, doing like the Whatever podcast and a bunch of other podcasts. So I hope he gets on Tim Pool's show as well. I hope that he continues his upward trajectory. It couldn't happen to nicer people, both him and Rachel and the other people that are around the Crucible. And you should consider going on to the Crucible. Go check out their channel. I don't know if I have the ability to invite people to their Discord channel, but it's a very active Discord channel where there's many nights you could just pop in there and bullshit to a bunch of interesting people from that channel. So yeah, it's definitely a channel worth checking out. They're not really dealing as much of like normative politics as I am necessarily. A lot of cultural and religious conversations, a lot of like putting out the absurdities of many of the other streamers that you see online. But I think it's incredibly entertaining, and it's well produced. It's done by people that are great people that would, I mean, here's the thing about Andrew, right? Even lefties would agree he's one of the best moderators out there. He treats people eminently fairly, even those that he massively disagrees with. And what better can you say about someone that even if they absolutely despise your political takes, will absolutely give you a fair shake? And I think that that's good. Yeah, and yeah, I know we'll get back to some arena action. We will here, Mr. White. And the other thing is, listen, you have to understand, like, we should support creators that sort of align with us politically. On these spaces, they're so inundated with these fucking insane lefties or these grifting righties that are, you know, oh, I'm a right-winger, but I believe in every left-wing position. I'm voting for Joe Biden, blah, 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 blah. So it's nice to actually support someone who doesn't hate you, that sort of shares a lot of your ideas and your political views, and it's actually a genuinely nice person. Thank you, that shit hurted. I appreciate it. Hopefully my channel gets a little bigger going on Tim Pool's show. What I'm hoping to do, it's unfortunate, I'm going to be on with a band by the name of Benjamin Weinrein. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Weinreiten? It sounds like Weirwarten. Sorry. I'll get his name before I go, I promise. But he's a really cool guy. I followed him on X. He's from the Epic Times. Definitely sort of a conservative journalist. I would have rather it been someone that I could debate, because that's what I wanted to do. And I'm hoping that I can part to Tim that anytime he needs a right-winger to come on and smack around some left-winger and debate, I'd be more than happy to do it. I think I do very well. So... I do have to run, though. I'm not even going to bother rating someone because I got to get going. One of the things is, even though I'm off the clock, I'm about to be on the clock because an emergency came up, so it's something I got to deal with. So not an emergency at my house or anything like that, but I got to help someone in a different house an hour and a half away via a call, how to do some technical paperwork stuff. So they knew their boy Rob would still be up at 11:20, so about to clock back in. But thank you all so much. I really appreciate it, all of you. I should be on tomorrow evening. That Tim Pool episode is going to be Friday the 15th, I believe at 10 a.m. Eastern. So it won't be on my channel. It'll be on one of Tim's channel. And I'll make sure you have more details of that as we get there Wednesday, Thursday. So thanks so much, everyone. Oh, don't forget, Wednesday I'll be streaming earlier than normal. I'm going to be on at 6 p.m. Eastern on Whick's show. And I'll be debating some people I don't know really well, Hutch, Laura De Laguna, and some other people on whether or not Trump is good for the Republican Party. I assure you it'll probably be a shit show, as those panels normally are. It'll be nice to walk into something like that. They probably feel it'll just be another walk in the park lefty panel with a bunch of agreeable right-wingers, and I look forward to showing them that won't be the case. So should be a lot of fun. All right, we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks so much. As always, have a good one.